This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian, and I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
So prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide if the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because this film is lit. Bond loathed and despised tea, that flat, soft, time-wasting opium of the masses. It's Thunderball, and this film is lit. Hello and welcome back to This Film is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. Were you going to say something?
I was just gonna, I didn't realize there were Brits who didn't like tea.
James Bond does not like tea, and I guess maybe probably by extension Ian Fleming potentially did not like tea. Who knows? But we are doing our very first James Bond novel and film. It's Thunderball. We have every single segment, tons to talk about. So let's get right into it with Let Me Sum Up. If you have not read or watched Thunderball, here is a brief summary. This is the film summary from Wikipedia, but the movie and book are pretty similar, so we're just going to do one summary this time. If you're not interested in a summary, just skip to 7:05 to get right to Guess Who.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
Spectre operative Emilio Largo devises a plan to hold NATO to ransom by hijacking 2 atomic bombs from a Royal Air Force Avro Vulcan strategic jet bomber during a training exercise. To facilitate Largo's plans, Spectre operative Count Lippe, is it Lippe or was it
I always said Lippe, but I don't know.
Count Lippe,
Lippa. Maybe, yeah, I don't know.
Count Lippe recruits Angelo Palazzi to oversee the theft of the bombs. With help from Spectre agent Fiona Volpe, Lippe has Palazzi surgically alter his face to match that of French Air Force pilot Francois Derval, who is assisting in the exercise. Volpe and Palazzi murder the real Derval while they are staying at the Shrublands Health Resort, only for the latter to demand more money. Volpe acquiesces merely to have him continue with their operation. Following the plan, Palazzi successfully hijacks the bomber, killing its crew, and lands it in shallow waters within the Bahamas. While the bombs are recovered by his men, Largo murders Palazzi for reneging on his original deal with Spectre. Meanwhile, British secret agent James Bond, recuperating at Shrublands after killing Spectre assassin Jacques Bouvard, who had faked his death at his chateau, notices Lippe's presence and keeps him under observation, discovering Derval's body. Upon being recalled to London, Bond finds himself targeted by Lippe for trying to interfere. Before he can defend himself, Volpe kills Lippe for jeopardizing Largo's scheme. Once back in London, Bond learns all the 00 agents are being put on high alert following the theft of the bombs. After being informed a major city in the United States or the United Kingdom will be destroyed unless £1 million, £100 million is paid to Spectre within 7 days. While in talks with M on his assignment, Bond requests to be assigned to Nassau to contact Derval's sister Domino after recognizing Derval from the photo given to the agents in their main briefing as the body he found at the resort. Bond meets with Domino, who he learns is the mistress of Largo, when he visits a casino. Both men recognize each other as adversaries and engage in a tense cat-and-mouse game while still pretending ignorance of each other's true nature. Following their initial meeting, Bond meets with his friend, CIA agent Felix Leiter.
I say Leiter, but I don't know for
Felix
sure.
Leiter.
It could be Leiter.
Fellow agent Paula Kaplan and MI6 Or is it M16? Is that an I or an L?
It's MI6.
MI6 Quartermaster Q to receive equipment to help with finding the bombs, including an underwater infrared camera and a miniature underwater breathing apparatus. Investigating Largo's ship, Disco Volante, he notices an underwater hatch beneath her that intrigues him. The next day, he visits Largo at his estate during the night, only to find that Paula had been abducted and committed suicide before she could talk. Forced to escape, Bond evades Largo's men during a
I think it's Chicano.
Chicano celebration. Volpe catches up to Bond, but is killed when Bond puts her between himself and a henchman aiming for Bond. Suspecting the bombs were brought to the area, Bond and Leiter search for the Vulcan and find it camouflaged underwater, along with the bodies of the crew members and Palazzi. Upon returning to the island, Bond reveals to Domino that her brother was killed by Largo and gets her to help him search Disco Volante. However, Largo catches her in the act and has her imprisoned. Meanwhile, Bond replaces one of Largo's men as Spectre prepares to move the bombs and manages to learn where one of them is being moved before being discovered and left behind. Reuniting with Leiter, the pair gets the U.S. Coast Guard and U.S. Navy to intercept the Disco Volante crew and recover one of the bombs in an underwater battle. Bond pursues Largo and grabs hold of Disco Volante as she sheds the rear half to become a hydrofoil to escape. Bond gets on deck and sends the Disco Volante out of control while he defeats Largo's men and fights Largo. In an ironic twist, Largo gains the upper hand and is about to shoot Bond when Domino kills Largo with a spear gun in revenge after his hired nuclear physicist frees her. The trio quickly flee Disco Volante barely before its destruction, whereupon the nuclear physicist vanishes and Bond and Domino are retrieved by a plane.
Of Thunderball, we actually do have a guess who, because good lord does Ian Fleming like writing character descriptions. So let's get right into that in Guess Who.
Who are you?
No one of consequence.
I must know.
Get used to disappointment.
Okay?
Been a while since we've done this, so if you don't remember how this works, I'm going to read some character descriptions from the book, and then Katie has to guess who that is. So I don't think you're going to get many of these. You might get one or two. I will preface this, and this might be helpful. A couple of these are more minor characters, but they have descriptions.
Okay.
When I say more minor characters, I mean, yeah, they're not like, there are some that are the main characters. I think those are the ones you're most likely to get, but there are some others that are more minor characters, but I included them anyways. So first one. The man was extremely handsome, a dark-bronzed woman killer with a neat mustache above the sort of callous mouth women kiss in their dreams. He had regular features that suggested Spanish or South American blood, and bold, hard brown eyes that turned up oddly, or as a woman would put it, intriguingly at the corners. He was an athletic-looking 6 foot, dressed in the sort of casual, well-cut beige herringbone tweed that suggests Anderson and Shepard. He wore a white silk shirt and a dark red polka dot tie, and the dark brown V-necked sweater looked like Vicuna. Bond summed him up as a good-looking bastard who got all the women he wanted and probably lived on them, and lived well.
Okay.
Also, warning, right now, there's going to be a lot of misogyny throughout this.
Yeah.
In these descriptions and other things. We're going to be lots of stuff. There's a lot of problematic stuff in James Bond. Just a heads up, prepare yourself. There's nothing like too crazy, but it is, in particular, quite a bit of misogyny. So.
Okay, so I don't think that this is the main villain, the eye patch man in the movie. You are correct.
It is not him.
Because he was like older.
Yeah.
And this description doesn't seem like an older man.
Okay.
But I do think he's probably a villain just based on like the way that he's described. Perhaps.
Okay.
So I'm gonna guess that this is Count Lipa.
You nailed it.
Nice.
It's not really what he looks like in the movie, particularly, but
I actually don't remember what he looks like in the movie.
To be fair,
barely
he's
saw
not
him.
in the movie a ton, and you don't see him much, even when he is. But yeah, he's also not in the book that much. He dies, in like chapter 5. He's killed. But yes, that is Count Lipa. Next up. She was an athletic-looking girl whom Bond would have casually associated with tennis or skating or show jumping. She had the sort of firm, compact figure that always attracted him, and a fresh, open-air type of prettiness that would have been commonplace but for a wide, rather passionate mouth and feminine version of, and a hint of authority that would be a challenge to men. She was dressed in a feminine version of the white smock worn by Mr. Wayne, and it was clear from the disguised curves of her breasts and hips that she had little on underneath it.
Nice. Okay. So initially, I think this could have been any woman.
Yes.
From the movie, but specifically the white smock. I'm gonna guess that this is. I think her name was Helen, the nurse caretaker lady.
Oh, was it?
From the
It might have
beginning?
been. So yes, it is that character at the health clinic or whatever. Yes, it is that character. In the book, she's named Patricia. I'm fairly certain.
Maybe her name was Patricia.
But you might be right. It might have been Helen. I'm not sure. I actually didn't know what her name was in the film, but yes, it is Patricia in the book, and it is that character.
Sick. I'm doing great.
Yes. That one, again, was, once you got to the bottom, was a little bit easier. Mr. Wayne is not, I actually had a description for him. He's not in the movie, but he's like runs the health resort or whatever. He's like the head of it. All right. Next one up. His eyes were deep black pools totally surrounded, as Mussolini's were, by very clear whites. The doll-like effect of this unusual symmetry was enhanced by long silken black eyelashes that should have belonged to a woman. The gaze of these soft doll's eyes was totally relaxed and rarely held any expression stronger than a mild curiosity in the object of their focus. They conveyed a restful certitude in their owner and in their analysis of what they observed. To the innocent, they exuded confidence, a wonderful cocoon of confidence in which the observed one could rest and relax, knowing that he was in comfortable, reliable hands. But they stripped the guilty of the false and made him feel transparent. The skin beneath the eyes that now slowly, mildly surveyed his colleagues was unpouched. There was no sign of debauchery, illness, or old age on the large, white, bland face under the square, wiry, black crew cut. The jawline, going to the appropriate middle-aged fat of authority, showed decision and independence. Only the mouth, under a heavy, squat nose, marred what might have been the face of a philosopher or a scientist. Proud and thin, like a badly healed wound, the compressed dark lips, capable only of false, ugly smiles, suggested contempt, tyranny, and cruelty. But to an almost Shakespearean degree, nothing about him was small. This is a bit of a, I'll say, no, I won't say anything. Go ahead.
I have no idea. The only thing I can think is that maybe this is the main baddie, Eye Patch Man, Largo. Yeah.
Is that your guess?
Yes.
So this is a bit unfair. This is not Largo, but it is the actual main baddie who is briefly in the film.
Ah, the man with the
Blofeld.
cat.
That is Blofeld, who is the head of Spectre. In the film, we don't actually see his face, so we don't know what he looks like.
So
in this one, we see him
cheat.
later. Yes, a little bit. We see him later in future movies. From I know we see him at some point. I don't know in what context or whatever. But yeah, we don't actually see him in this movie. But that is Blofeld. He was a big, conspicuously handsome man of about 40. He was a Roman, and he looked like a Roman. Not from the Rome of today, but from the Rome of the ancient coins. The large, long face was sunburned a deep mahogany brown, and the light glinted off the strong, rather hooked nose and the clean-cut lantern jaw that had been meticulously shaved before he had started out late that afternoon. In contrast to the hard, slow-moving brown eyes, the mouth with its thick, rather down-curled lips belonged to a satyr. Ears that, from dead in front, looked almost pointed, added to an animalness that would devastate women. The only weakness in the fine centurion face lay in the overlong sideburns and the too carefully waved black hair that glistened so brightly with pomade that it might almost have been painted onto the skull. There was no fat on the big-boned frame. He had fought for Italy in the Olympic foils, had fought for Italy, in the Olympic foils, was almost an Olympic-class swimmer with the Australian crawl, and only a month before had won the senior class in the Nassau Water Ski Championships. The muscles bulged under the exquisitely cut sharkskin jacket. An aid to his athletic prowess were his hands. They were almost twice the normal size, even for a man of his stature, and now, as they walked across the chart holding a ruler and a pair of dividers, they looked extruded from the white sleeves that rested on the white chart, almost like large brown furry animals quite separate from their owner.
What? This does not sound like any person I recall from the movie. It's got a chart and a ruler. And I don't know what is a pair of dividers?
I don't know what that is, but it's like some sort of tool for using with what he's doing. There's one other hint in here that you could pull, I think. Because you're right that for the most part, this does not look like the movie character.
Yeah.
Really, like kind of in some aspects, but not like a lot of it. But there is one particular word or thing that is a clue that I think is where the movie pulled an aspect of this character for the film.
He's good at swimming.
That's another one, but that wasn't what I was thinking of.
Okay.
That is a clue, but it's not what I was thinking of.
He's from Italy?
That's also kind of a clue, but also not what I was thinking of. I mean, there's several things that do apply to him. There was one thing in particular that to me. But anyways.
Oh, he's got a sharkskin jacket. This is Largo.
Yes, this is Largo. The sharkskin jacket was what I was thinking of because, in the movie he has sharks. Yeah. Obviously, a lot of this looks very different. He is a big man, like in the movie. He's like a large guy, but and a good swimmer. We would assume based on.
It seemed like he was pretty good at swimming.
Yeah. But apart from that, like the hair and stuff is not, and there's no mention obviously of an eye patch here, which was kind of his defining characteristic in the film. So, all right, next one, two more here. Next one, he was a man she hadn't seen before in Nassau. He was about 6 feet tall and somewhere in his middle 30s. He had dark, rather cruel good looks and very clear blue-gray eyes that were now observing her inspection sardonically. A scar down his right cheek showed pale against a tan so mild that he would have only recently come to the island. He was wearing a very dark blue, lightweight, single-breasted suit over a cream silk shirt and a black knitted silk tie. Despite the heat, he looked cool and clean, and his only concession to the tropics appeared to be the black saddle-stitched sandals on his bare feet.
Is this Bond?
This is Bond.
Nice.
We actually get a description of Bond in this one from Domino's perspective. So, and then finally, strap yourselves in for this one. You'll get this one. She wore a gondolier's broad-rimmed straw hat tilted imprudently down her nose. She had a gay to hell with you face that Bond thought would become animal in passion. In bed, she would fight and bite and then suddenly melt into hot surrender. He could almost see the proud, sensual mouth bear away from the even white teeth in a snarl of desire, and then afterwards soften into a half pout of loving slavery. In profile, the eyes were soft charcoal slits such as you see on some birds, but in the shop Bond had seen them full face. Then they had been fierce and direct with a golden flicker in the dark brown that held much the same message as the mouth. The profile, the straight, small, uplifted nose, the determined set of the chin, and the clean-cut sweep of the jawline were as decisive as a royal command, and the way the head was set on the neck had the same authority, the poise one associates with imagery of princesses. Two features modified the clean-cut purity of line. A soft, muddled Brigitte Bardot haircut that escaped from under the straw hat in endearing disarray, and two deeply cut but soft dimples which could only have been etched by a sweet, if rather ironic smile that Bond had not yet seen. The sunburn was not overdone, and her skin had none of that dried, exhausted sheen that can turn the texture of even the youngest skin into something more like parchment. Beneath the gold, there was an earthy warmth in her cheeks that suggested a good, healthy peasant strain from the Italian Alps, and her breasts, high-riding and deeply V'd, were from the same stock. The general impression, Bond decided, was of a willful, high-tempered, sensual girl, a beautiful Arab mare who would only allow herself to be ridden by a horseman with steel thighs and velvet hands, and then only with curb and sawbit, and then only when he had broken her to bridle and saddle. Bond thought that he would like to try his strength against hers. Yep.
Was the entire book this Horny?
When describing women, yeah. I mean, like, whenever a woman comes up, it is this horny all the time. Yes, this is almost smut, like at times, like
Yeah.
it's without the smut, like it's smut in its descriptions, but when there's like sex, you don't actually get any descriptions of the sex. We kind of like fade to black,
Right.
So,
so this is Domino.
yes,
I
this is
assume.
Domino. Yes, yeah, yes, absolutely, yeah. Oh goodness, and in particular, his Fleming's descriptions of characters are all like this. They're just pages, like they go on forever. And I don't dislike a lot of, it definitely lets you kind of build the character, and the prose itself I think is mostly evocative in a way it's nice if you disregard like the the grossness of some of it. But yeah. Okay, so I think you got what? 1, 2, 3, 4. You got 4 of the 6, I think. So not bad.
Nice.
Better than I thought. All right, that's it for that. Katie has quite a few questions, so we're gonna get into those. Was that in the book?
Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone.
The what?
Honestly, don't you two read?
So this movie opens in media res at a funeral, and Bond and an unnamed woman are at a funeral, and there's a mysterious veiled woman, presumably a widow, and I wanted to know if the book opened the same way.
It does not. The book just opens with Bond waking up, recovering from a night of drinking and gambling.
Nice.
But I believe most, if not all, of the Bond films start like this, with Bond like finishing up some other assignment or doing something that ends up being related to his current assignment. Basically, the movies just all open with like an action scene of some sort, even if it's not like, this one's not a particularly like intense action scene, but there is, there's a little bit of the jetpack and some fighting and stuff, So the movie, I think, they just want to start on the opening action scene. None of this is from the book at all. And I do think I prefer the book's kind of more restrained opening, personally. And in particular, because I'm just not a big fan of this opening. It gives you no context for what's going on. You don't know who these characters are or like why. You know what I mean? And on top of that, the fight and like the jetpack, I understand why it was like a thing that would excite audiences then, but it just kind of looks cheesy by today's standards and stuff. There are some movies that are, like Casino Royale, the new one opens with like a big crazy action set piece that is super intense and like engaging and fun. And so I don't mind it in those regards. In this one, I wish they had just gone with the book's opening, which again is just Bond waking up hungover and being like, oh God. Which kind of sets the tone for his journey in this book, which I thought was interesting. So
okay, well that kind of negates my next 2 questions. But the next thing that we find out in the scene as he's fighting this person is that what we thought was the widow and her veil is actually
the widow arrives home and Bond is waiting.
Yes, and it's actually the man who was presumed to be dead.
Yes.
In a disguise.
Yeah. So that that is a member of Spectre who, like you said, was supposedly dead, but turns out was pretending to be his grieving wife or girlfriend or whatever, in order to trick Bond to kill him, basically.
Gotcha.
So this was all a scheme. And I don't know in the movies at this point if they're aware of what Spectre is, but in the books, and again, this would be confusing because in the books, this is the introduction of Spectre. Before this, there's been other organizations. There's like an organization called SMERSH, which is like a Russian criminal organization or whatever. But this is the introduction of Spectre in the books. I don't know in the movies because of the timeline. They may have introduced Spectre prior to this in the movies. It wouldn't surprise me if they had. So it's also possible, I don't think this is related to the ending of Goldfinger in any way, but it could be. It's been so long since I've seen Goldfinger. And normally that's not the case. Like normally the end of the last movie doesn't like directly lead in, but there is a chance that maybe like something to do with the end of Goldfinger led into this opening. I doubt it, but it's possible. Again, I just haven't seen Goldfinger in so long that I'm not sure.
Yeah.
My guess would be that it's not related. It's just, again, because that's usually how they open is he's just on some case doing something
Yeah.
And then we get in and we get that opening, and then we get into the actual like story we're gonna be doing. So
I gotcha. But I did kind of like the way that the scene ended, though,
Yeah.
because he kills this guy, right? He like beats him to death, and then as he's about to run out of the room, because all of his henchmen are like breaking down the door to get to him, he grabs a vase of flowers and like throws the flowers over his corpse.
Yeah.
And runs out. And then he gets his jetpack that you mentioned earlier.
Flies away.
And I was like, oh, cool. He's going to get away on his jetpack.
Yeah.
But then he flies and he only goes like a block away.
Yeah.
He lands and they're like chasing him.
Yeah, that was just to get the jetpack in the movie. And also the range of that jetpack is not particularly far from my knowledge. You can fly it for like 45 seconds or something like that. And then you have to recharge, like refill it or whatever. Yeah, again, obviously none of this is in the book, but it is also kind of I don't know. My only experience with Bond as a character from the books is this book. It's the only one I've read. So I don't know how in line with the throwing the flowers on the body is with the Bond from the books. It's not super in line with this character in this book necessarily, but in the movies, that is Bond to a T. He's like very cheeky. He always is quipping and doing silly stuff like that. That's the movies, again, compared to this book. This movie is, and it seems like all the movies are a little bit sillier, a little more playful than the books are, which are not like, don't lack any of that. Like there are moments of that in the book, but the movies definitely amplify it from this one book that I've read. But that flowers, throwing the flowers on his body is very much in line with the thing Bond would do.
It's almost campy.
It is. Oh, and some of these movies are very camp, and they get. And as a kid, the less campy movies were always the ones I liked more. The modern Bond movies are like not camp at all.
Right.
They're like very serious, but they're also very good. Or at least the ones I've seen. I've only seen the first three. But the older Bonds, they fluctuate between how campy they are. Some of them are like crazy over the top camp, and some of them are a lot more serious. This one's kind of in the middle, I would say. But yeah, It's definitely fits, and that was another thing. That the green screen when he's putting on the helmet for the jetpack is like that classic terrible '60s compositing. It looks so bad. And there's a handful of shots like that in this movie. When otherwise a lot of the effects are like practical and stuff. That in particular, him putting on that helmet was very funny to me. And that might have had to be a pickup shot because in the prequel I did some research. The person who was flying the jetpack, they may have filmed like all of that Bond stuff, like the fight and stuff before the jetpack thing, and then the person who flew the jetpack apparently refused. They initially wanted him to do it without the helmet, but he wouldn't do it without a helmet. He's like, "No, I'm wearing a helmet to do this." And so I'm thinking they may have had to go back and add the shot of Bond putting on the helmet so that he had a helmet on when you see the stunt guy fly the jetpack or whatever. And so that might be why it's a composite, would be my guess. But
well, I'm glad the stuntman wanted to wear a helmet.
Yes. And it's not even a stuntman. It's literally like at the time there was like two people. He's a stuntman specifically for that thing. There's like two people that can fly that jetpack in the world or whatever. So yeah, he was not just like a generic stuntman that also flew that jetpack. It was like a jetpack pilot.
So following this, we're introduced to our hive of villainy.
Yes.
And we meet our main bad guy for this movie, Largo, and he has an eye patch, which is classic and iconic. Yeah. And I guess I have my answer, but I'm still gonna ask if he has an eye patch in the book. Yeah,
like you said, we've done the guess who at this point, so we know the answer, but no, Largo does not have an eye patch in the book, or at least it's not described. It doesn't say he couldn't have one. It's just not mentioned. But with the detail that Fleming goes into,
you would think it would be mentioned.
It would probably come up.
It would probably be made of shark skin.
Yes.
So he goes into Spectre, and we see that whole deal. And then we see the big bad, the faceless villain.
Blofeld.
Which I don't recall that they mention his name.
They probably don't, but his name is Blofeld.
But we see him, and we can't see his face, and he's sitting in a chair, and he's stroking a fluffy white cat.
Yes.
And so I've got two questions here. One, is there a faceless villain petting a cat in this book? And two, is this the origin of that trope?
So as far as I'm aware, this is the origin of that trope. I don't know for sure. It may go back further than this, but this is the one that is parodied the most, like in Austin Powers and like a lot of modern stuff. When you have the villain stroking the cat, that is a parody of Blofeld from the Bond movies. Again, there may be something previous to this I'm unaware of, but as far as I know, this is the origin of that. This is also something I like more in the movie because in the book, there is no mention of a cat. Blofeld does not have a cat, at least in this book. Again, I have not read any others. There may be in future books, he has a cat at some point. But in this book, he does not have a cat. He's just a guy hanging out. He's just the dude. The description I read is the whole description we get, and there's never a mention of a cat. So, so yeah, that's something I like more in the book, the evil cat. I mean, or in the movie, that's the birth of a classic trope.
Yeah, for sure. So then all of the Spectre agents are reporting on their nefarious deeds to Blofeld, and he accuses one of them of embezzling, or I guess maybe he knows for sure that this guy was embezzling, and then he just straight up murks this guy in the middle of the meeting, and then his chair he goes down into the floor, and then his chair like comes back up out of the floor smoking.
Yeah.
And then they continue their meeting, and I'm wondering if any of that is from the book.
Kind of, yes. I mean, mostly, yes. He does electrocute a guy. Blofeld does electrocute a guy, which I think is what the movie's going for. You said blow up, but he electrocutes him. In the movie, it's mentioned, or in the book, it's mentioned that they're like he wired the chair basically to have be like an electric chair essentially. But they do not have automatic disposal chairs. The chair that drops down into the floor and then he comes back up smoking. That is not in the book at all. And this is actually something I prefer in the book. Just this whole scene in general where this Spectre meeting that we see in the film, because the scene where he kills the Spectre agent is just way more interesting and brutal. So in the movie, it's described that like they're embezzling this guy. He thinks he accuses one guy of embezzling and then executes a different guy who was actually doing it or whatever. In the movie or in the book, it's not embezzling. It's that on their last mission, they kidnapped some young, like rich couples, some couples like rich, like teenage daughter or something like that. And it comes back and Blofeld finds out that the daughter had been raped basically while in the custody of these people, and this is the Russians, I believe. I can't remember who it is, but one of these members of Spectre, which Spectre is made up of a bunch of different groups of it's like the Italian mafia, the Russian mafia. It's like all these like groups of like organized crime from different countries have all like send people to become part of Spectre to be like this. They're like this super group of bad guys or whatever. Anyway, so this girl that they had kidnapped was sexually assaulted, and one of the guys implies that she had consented to it, but Blofeld does not care about this at all. And actually, the thing that's really interesting is that we find out Blofeld is talking through all this, and like in the movie, he calls out this one guy. He has like they all have numbers, and he has like number 10 stand up or whatever, and he has 10 stand up. And he's talking to him, and he's like going through like what all happened, and he's like, and he says that he actually gave the parents half of the money back because of this, even though and he's like, despite the fact that there was a tracker in the money, and they had like warned the family not to go to not to do that or whatever, but he's like, but that surely the tracker wasn't their choice. That was something the asshole cops did or whatever. Yeah. Basically, like he's like a criminal with like a code. Basically, like it's just kind of what the book is implying. Like he's like, he knew the cops put that tracker in there without really asking the family, so he doesn't hold that against the family. He gives them back half the money they gave him for ransom because of what happened to their daughter. And then so yeah, he has, that's what it is. He has 7 stand up, and it like is like kind of accusing him, but he's like, but I know who actually did it. And then he electrocutes number 12, who's still sitting in his chair. And the thing that's really the other thing that's really interesting about this scene is that none of the other people are like worried about this. In particular, like the guy he has stand up and calls out like doesn't even blink and is like completely trusting. They all completely trust Blofield's like that he will make that he's always right and that he knows what to do and he will mete out justice like accurately. And so literally like this guy who he has stand up and is saying all this stuff to knows he's not in danger because he knows he didn't do anything wrong. And so he just stands there and like lets Blofeld go on this big thing. And then when he kills the other guy, he's like, yep. And then just sits down. And I thought that was super fascinating. This idea that like this big evil villain, like they all implicitly trust him to like be like moral in a weird, immoral way. Like it's very fascinating. And then on top of that, just the description of the guy dying is like horrifying in the in the book. The body of Pierce Berard, seized in the iron fist of 3,000 volts, arced in the armchair as if it had been kicked in the face, or kicked in the back. The rough mat of black hair rose sharply straight up on his head and remained upright, a gollywog fringe for the contorted, bursting face. The eyes glared wildly and then faded. A blackened tongue slowly protruded between the snarling teeth and remained hideously extended. Thin wisps of smoke rose from under the hands, from the middle of the back, and from under the thighs where the concealed electrodes in the chair had made contact. Blofeld pulled back the switch. The lights in the room that had dimmed to orange, making a dull supernatural glow, brightened to normal. The roasted meat and burned fabric smell spread slowly. The body of number 12 crumpled horribly. There was a sharp crack as the chin hit the edge of the table. It was all over. And then they just leave him there the rest of the meeting. They just leave his body there the rest of the
tasty.
meeting. Yep. Yeah.
So following this scene where we find out about the villain's plan, we catch back up with Bond, who is at this like health resort. And people keep telling him that he's not supposed to be working. Is he like on vacation at a health resort in the book?
Yes, kind of. So this is one of my biggest complaints with the movie, is that it doesn't really care to set up some of the important things that are happening in the film. I'll talk more about this later, and especially my final verdict. But the movie is very much like a kind of like bits and pieces pulled out of the book without much of the connective tissue and explanation of why we're going where we are that we get in the book. In the movie, Bond appears to be at the health clinic because of the injury he got in the fight in the opening of the movie,
right?
Which isn't the worst explanation in the world, but it's actually much more interesting in the book. In the book, he's there because he had a physical and he was fine, like he was healthy, but there was a few things that on there that they were like, you got to get this sorted, and it's that he smokes and drinks way too much. And that he's like on the edge of being too unhealthy, or he's on the edge of it being a problem to like his physical fitness for the thing. So who M runs the whole, who we see in this movie when he goes into the meeting with all the double O's, right. He's like the main guy. We see him a couple times in this movie. Later in the current films, or since all the Pierce Brosnan movies forward, that's played by Judi Dench and but in this one, M sends him to the Shrublands Health Resort because M has also gone to the same health resort, and we find out that M is like a weird, like, woo guy. I have more notes about this in a little bit, but like M's like a weird woo guy who's like, you got to go to this health resort. It'll set you right. You got to detox. You got to do all this stuff. Now, to be fair, Bond has a horrible, and I have notes about this later, he has a horrible lifestyle. Like he does need something, but we'll get into it. But yeah, he is sent to this clinic because he's like close to not being fit for service, basically. And they're like trying to like jumpstart him to like make sure he's good enough to go, basically. And that's why he's here. It's not because he has like a specific injury or anything like that. It's because his physical didn't go great. And he needs to detox, essentially.
So obviously, though, he can't help himself from working while he's at this resort. And he meets is it Count Lipa that has like the tattoo on his hand, which I don't think ever came back.
It only comes back and Bond makes a phone call to ask about it.
Right.
And then that, in the book at least, and I think maybe in the movie, that spurs Lipa attacking him. In the book, Lipa overhears Bond making that phone call. And Bond realizes he was careless when he made that phone call. And it's like, shit, I bet somebody heard me. Yeah. And Lipa hears him and that's why he ends up attacking him. But yeah, it's That's the extent of it. It's just he's like realizes he's part of like a gang, like a criminal organization.
Right. So he sees him, and Count Lipa strikes Bond as a suspicious character. So he's doing some snooping around, and he goes into his like suite there and is snooping. And there's a man in there who has apparently had like total facial reconstruction surgery. He's all bandaged up. But what I want to know is when Bond is leaving the suite, when he's sneaking out, does he steal a single grape from the fruit bowl?
No, that scene does not take place in the book, and he does not steal a grape or anything like that. Again, I do think that fits fairly well with his character, particularly in the movies. That is Bond to a T in the films. And I think even to some extent it fits his character in the books. He's just not quite as playful, at least in this book. He's not quite as like playful and like, fun as he is in the movies, I would say. He is. Like I'm not saying it's not there. It's definitely there, but that kind of stuff is like a little level above what the Bond we get in the book. But it's very much in line with every Bond portrayal in like all the movies.
So he goes back to his treatment, and the caregiver nurse lady straps him into this machine that is basically a rack.
Yes. The chapter is called The Rack in the book.
It's like to stretch his spine.
Yes. Again, this is like a woo clinic, so they do like nonsense treatments. Yeah.
And then we don't see who it is in the movie, but somebody comes in and tries to kill him by cranking this machine up to high. So it's like,
well, we see who it is because we see the tattoo, but
but
we don't see their face.
Yeah. So they set the machine to high, so it's like pulling and stretching him.
Yeah.
Is that from the book?
Yes, that scene is like nearly identical. Like literally, like the dialogue, it like she puts him on the machine, sets it to like 120, and then it's like, I'll be back in 30 minutes or whatever. And then somebody else comes in, turns it up like all the way to the top, and then Bond like almost dies. Yeah, basically. But yes, it's like all identical.
And then in the movie, he afterwards he just immediately has sex.
Yeah, he gets up and
he's like ready to go. And I don't know how could the man possibly have sex after that?
So that's where the book is better, in my opinion, because in the book he literally blacks out and almost dies. And wakes up like the next day in like a bed, like being treated. Like he is not just like fine afterwards. Like it literally almost kills him in the book. Patricia, who is the caregiver in the book, she actually like has to inject him with something. They say some chemical or I don't know what it does or what he needed, but she has to inject him with something to like save him, to do something. And then he spends like several days recovering.
Yeah.
And there's like a whole discussion about like he talks to the owner of the club, and they're worried he's gonna like mention it or sue them, and like it becomes this whole thing, and he ends up not saying anything, and he actually does go along with the lie that he did it himself, like accidentally, just so that he can investigate. Like he doesn't tell him like, oh, some guy came in and did it, because he doesn't want them to know. He wants to go deal with that himself or whatever. But yeah, no, he does not immediately go have sex in the book. He almost dies in the book.
So I mentioned facial reconstruction surgery man, and we find out that this is part of Spectre's plot to steal the nuclear weapons, and they hired this man to basically become this pilot.
Yeah.
Right down to like total facial reconstruction.
Yeah.
Is that from the book?
No, and I hate this change a lot. I do not understand its purpose. I will talk more about this later and better in the book. But there is no face swapping or anything like that. Spectre just recruits. So the character that they face swap and kill, like the guy they kill, and then the other guy gets plastic surgery to copy his face. In the book, they just recruit the first guy, the pilot. They just recruit him and basically bribe him, offer him a bunch of money to steal the plane. And there's some other stuff going on there again, which I'll talk about later. But I do not understand why they added this, other than they thought it was like more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's an extra like sprinkle of intrigue.
Yeah, and like spy movie stuff, and
Yeah.
maybe there's something to do. I don't know.
And maybe they wanted the pilot to be like an innocent, like a noble figure.
I will say, I think maybe that is part of it, is that they wanted, in the movie, we find out right at the beginning that it is Domino's brother, and they maybe wanted him to be innocent. I hate that. It's so much more interesting in the book. We'll get to it. It's a terrible change in my opinion. It's so stupid. Literally no reason to do it. Again, I guess it kind of like streamlines some of those stuff later, but whatever. It's dumb. I don't like it.
Well, so this guy that they've hired to do this, he ends up trying to demand more money, which honestly I get, because you changed your face and everything. I would want a lot of money as well. But he demands more money, and the evil redheaded lady, will get to her. I think I have a question about her later.
Yeah, Fiona.
Yeah, she's just like, yeah, sure, we'll give you more money. And as soon as she said that, I was like, oh no, this guy's dead. He just signed his own death warrant. And he does in fact die. Eye Patch Man, Largo. I called him Eye Patch Man the entire time because I did not catch his name until like 3/4 into the movie.
It's fair.
I knew almost no one's name.
No, that is fair. Movie. Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah, for sure.
So when the plane is underwater, he's trying to get out of his seatbelt, and Largo just swims over and cuts his breathing tube so that he drowns. Does that happen in the book?
So the pilot is killed in the book, but it's better in the book all around to me. One, we don't have the weird convoluted plot with it being some bad guy that agreed to get his face changed. But it's unrelated to him asking for more money. So in the book, the guy does not ask for more money. The pilot is just the actual pilot that they recruit. He does not ask for more money, at least from my memory. They just kill him because they were always going to kill him to get rid of loose ends. Like he was just a guy that was not part of the criminal organization. He's just some random guy who they needed because he had access to fly the plane, or he had access to get on the plane because of his position within this. He's like part of NATO or whatever, and goes on these missions. And they needed him for that, and they were just always going to kill him because they didn't want him to be able to rat them out or whatever, basically. So that's one way that's better. Whatever. I mean, ask for money and killing him because of that maybe is. I think maybe even in the book, maybe even in the movie, they were going to kill him either way. Maybe it didn't matter that he asked for more money. Maybe they were going to kill him regardless. Who knows? But the other thing is that the way they kill him in the book is just way better. As you mentioned in the movie, he's like stuck in the thing, and Largo comes down and like cuts his oxygen hose or whatever, and he just like suffocates. In the book, he lands the plane. The plane doesn't actually sink initially. It like sits and floats on top of the water for a bit, which is how it actually would be. Like it
right.
Because like, you know, the landing on the Hudson or whatever, the plane like it'll float for a while before it actually sinks. So he lands it and then he actually walks out on the wing. And Largo and his crew show up on the boat, and they walk out on the wing, and Largo, I believe it's Largo, walks up to him, and the guy like makes a joke. He's like, "Yeah, I got your nuclear plane here. You got to sign on the line to take." Like he like tries to make a joke, and Largo just walks up and like shakes his hand and then stabs him in the brain. Like he like pulls a knife out and stabs him up through the bottom of his like chin into his brain and just kills him. And then just throws him into the water. It's like way more brutal and terrifying. And I think it's just because, and again, part of that is these movies are a little more like PG, like PG-13, which they're probably PG because this is before PG-13, but they can't go that like brutal in their violence. Yeah. But yeah, that in the book, he's killed in just like a way more brutal way that I thought was way more interesting, but he does die.
Does Bond at any point refer to himself as a licensed troubleshooter in the book? So
I found an online version of this book, and I did a quick search, and I was not able to find that anywhere. I also did not recall that line anywhere. It's a good line. It may come from another book. Because again, at this point, like several other books have been out when they're making this movie and stuff like that. So I don't know if it may come from a different book, but it is not in this book.
Okay.
But it is a good line.
Another line or exchange, really, that I was wondering about. So when Bond meets Domino in this movie, they're out on the water, and he says to her, "You swim like a man." And she fires right back, "So do you."
Yeah.
Is that from the book?
It is not.
Boo.
But he does think to himself in the book that Domino drives like a man. So I think it might be a reference to that. When they first meet, he like gets in the car with her and she's taking him somewhere, and she's a very aggressive driver, and Bond is like impressed. And he thinks to himself that she drives like a man. There's at one point she like very deftly like cuts off a horse-drawn carriage and then she gets out of the car without opening the door. She flips over the door or whatever. And then she starts shit talking the carriage driver, and both Bond and the carriage driver are like both very into it. They're both like very like turned on by this. But no, she does. Yeah, the swimming part, no, but he does say you drive. Well, and again, he doesn't say it. He just thinks that she drives like a man.
So
more on the driving of men and women later. Boy, that's a fun one.
Oh, good. I can't wait. So there's a scene in the movie where Bond meets Largo, but then I believe this is the first time they interact at the casino.
I think it is. Yeah.
And so they're at a casino and they're playing poker, I guess. No,
I mean it's a card game.
They're playing a card game.
Yeah,
some card game that you play at casinos. Yeah. And Bond is just talking to him, and he's like trying to get a reaction out of him, and he just keeps finding excuses to use the word Spectre while he's talking to him. Does that come from the book?
Yes. This scene happens later in the book than it does in the movie. Like, they've already met quite a few times at this point in the book when this scene happens in the casino. But yes, Bond does keep saying Spectre to him to see if he reacts at all because at this point in the book he is completely unsure, and I think even in the movie he's unsure if Largo is involved in any of this, or like if he's part of Spectre or knows what it is, or any of that sort of things. So he keeps saying Spectre to like try to get a reaction, to like see if he thinks that Largo is in on this plan or whatever. But again, that whole casino scene is pretty similar down to them playing. They're actually playing in the book. It's called, they call it chemin de fer, but it's apparently a type of baccarat, which baccarat is like the classic Bond card game. It's like a European, it's not really played in America much at all. It's primarily played in like Europe, and I think I read like South America and stuff like that. It's just a type of card game. I think it's a French game originally. But it's just it's a specific type of card game that Bond plays a lot in Bond movies for whatever reason. He also plays poker, but plays a lot of baccarat, which is funny because like I said, I don't think I've ever seen baccarat played in real life, or I have no idea how it's played. And when I read it in the book, it's very confusing. But anyways, one addition that I like in the movie that is not in the book is that in the movie, I think that it's implied that Felix Leiter is the dealer during this game, and that Bond has fixed the game. Because as he's walking away, I think Domino says like, hopefully his luck will change, and Bond's like, I don't think it will, or something like that.
Yeah.
And with the camera kind of lingers on the dealer, and I'm pretty sure that's Leiter. It's hard to tell because he's wearing like glasses or sunglasses or something like that. In the book, he seemingly just wins because he's very lucky. For the first couple hands, and then on the third hand he does bluff Largo, and that's how he wins the third hand and wins most of the money. But before that he just seemingly gets very lucky and just beats him a couple times. But I did like in the movie that it seems like Leiter is like doing something. Although in baccarat I don't know if you can. It's more complicated because the cards, I don't know how it works, because they pass the cards around and the players can deal and stuff, and then the person who would traditionally be the dealer in like a casino actually just like does the chips. I don't know. It's complicated. I don't know. I don't understand how baccarat works, or chemin de fer, or whatever the fuck. Which apparently chemin de fer is just a variation of baccarat, is what I was reading, because I was trying to figure out what the hell. Because in the book it just says they're playing chemin de fer. I'm like, what the hell is that? And then I was like, oh, it's baccarat. I've heard of that at least.
So after this scene, Bond goes back to his hotel room and he walks in and he flips open the phone book where we can see that he's hidden a tape recorder. And he plays this tape recorder and uses it. I thought this scene was kind of cool. He uses it to like figure out, like he can hear somebody walking and he like traces their footsteps into the bathroom.
Yeah.
Is any of that from the book?
It is not. I also like that scene, and I will say it is in line with some of the like kind of detective work Bond does in the book.
Mm-hmm.
He's like a very clever, I mean, obviously, secret agent in the books. And there's some scenes and some other parts of the book that I'll talk about later that don't make it into the movie where we kind of see how brilliant he is. And like his schemes and stuff. But this one is not from the book. And specifically getting to the tape recorder, which is not that particularly interesting of a gadget, but
right.
We'll get to the gadgets later. At least in this book, were far fewer gadgets and like way less focus on them than is in like all the Bond movies. Like that's a big component of the Bond movies is like the gadgets or whatever. I will say I kind of expected that. I figured that was maybe a thing the movies played up more. And it is. And again, not that this one in particularly fits into that because this is a tape recorder, but no, this does not come from the book. But it is a good scene.
I liked it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we meet Leiter, who is Bond's CIA friend. They say he's like his CIA.
He's his contact,
Yeah.
His CIA partner guy.
Yeah. Which I thought was fun because I didn't realize that they did like CIA crossovers.
Oh yeah, Felix Leiter is in a ton of the stories as his like CIA buddy.
Okay, so he is from the books. Does he look? Is he dressed like he's from Miami Vice in the books? Because that cracked me up in the movies.
It also cracked me up in the movie, and this book doesn't really have a description of Leiter. I went back and checked. Although it does mention that he has a hook hand. That is the only. Yes, that is.
Why would the movie leave that out?
It does. I will say in some of these early movies, he does have a hook hand from my memory. In some of the variations, I think it may be in the Roger Moore ones. Leiter might have a hook hand. But also from my memory, he is pretty consistently dressed like that in these early Bond movies. I don't recall. In the newer ones, he's played by, I can't remember the guy's name. Great actor, but he doesn't have a hook hand, and he doesn't dress. He just dresses like Bond, like he's like a cool,
boring.
Sure, but he's a much more interesting. I like Felix Leiter a lot in the new movies. But anyways, he does seemingly dress like that in kind of all of the early movies from my memory. And the other thing that's interesting in this one, I was listening to the audiobook for some of this, and the guy who did the audiobook, which I have no idea when the audiobook was recorded for this. It was on CD. So probably quite a while ago. But he does like a very southern accent for Felix Leiter. He's like, he almost sounds like Foghorn Leghorn or something. He's like, Bond, you gotta get over to the bear. He like does a very southern accent for Felix Leiter, which I thought was very funny. But yeah, that cracks me up too. That in the movie they're like, okay, the American guy dresses like a clown, like he just. Like Bond is wearing like suits and very fashionable like European swimwear and stuff, and then Felix Leiter is like in a like the most garish Hawaiian like shirt you've ever seen, and like he looks ridiculous all the time.
It's really too bad that you didn't get to include a description of him in Guess Who, because the hook hand would have really thrown me.
That's literally the only thing that it mentions about his appearance is that he has a hook hand in this book. Again, he's been in earlier books, so I'm thinking maybe in some of the earlier ones he got a description, but he does not have one in this one.
Okay, so the evil redheaded lady, Fiona
Volpe
was her name, and we met her earlier, but now in this particular scene, Bond, I guess, doesn't know who she is initially and gets in the car with her. He gets a lift from her. Yeah. And she drives super fast to try and scare him. And I think he was scared. Yeah. He looked nervous.
A little nervous.
A little nervous. Is any of that from the book?
No. So Fiona is not in this book at all. She may be from a different book. I don't know, but she is not in this book at all. And I believe in this movie, she's Spectre number 6, I think they say, or 7 or something like that. She's one of the Spectre agents.
Yeah.
But yeah, not in the book at all. I quite enjoyed her character in the film. I think she's a fun like foil for Bond as the evil, sexy spy lady. Like I think she plays off Bond well. And was enjoyable. I think the closest thing to this scene is again when Bond meets Domino for the first time. She's a very like I think they kind of took some of that. And because she's like I don't know if it's ever specifically described that Domino is like driving around at like 120 miles an hour, but she's a very assertive and like aggressive driver. Yeah. And again, Bond is like into that in the book. So I think maybe that's some of what they're pulling. But you're right, he does seem kind of like a little nervous in the film, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, she's not in the book.
So then there's a whole scene in the movie where Bond goes to Largo's estate as like a guest.
Yeah.
And just like has lunch and chills with him for an afternoon.
Yeah.
And I was a bit perplexed by this because it seemed like they both knew who the other was. And I didn't really understand the purpose other than like showing us the pool of sharks.
Yeah. So he does kind of, he goes to Palmyra in the book, which is Largo's like estate or whatever. But it's much better in the book because in the book, neither of them know who the other one is when all of this is happening.
Yeah.
In the book, Bond has a cover story. And Largo buys it. In the book, Bond is pretending to be just like a rich investor who wants to buy the Palmyra, the house that Largo is staying at. He wants to buy it, basically. So he goes to visit because he's interested in buying it or whatever. And Largo buys this hook, line, and sinker. Like, Largo fully believes that Bond is just some guy who's like some rich guy who wants to buy this house or whatever. And Bond has suspicions about Largo, but he does not know for sure that he is definitely like part of Spectre and like the guy he's looking for and like running.
So he's like investigating.
He's investigating, yeah. So to me in the book, that just makes way more sense why they kind of have these interactions, because they have several interactions like that in the book. Like one time he goes on the yacht, one time, and in the movie it does seem like, but at this point they very clearly know who each other are. Yeah, and it's kind of dumb. The movie gives the reason for why Largo doesn't just immediately kill Bond, as that if they were to kill him, it would call down like all the cavalry, basically. Like they would tip off like MI6 and all of the intelligence agencies that they need to send their people here because that's where they are. Which I think is fine. But again, I just prefer the book's version where he just successfully cons Largo for like most of the time he's on the island. And Leiter is like his assistant. Like he pretends to be his assistant or whatever. They have this whole ploy. Yeah. They have this whole ploy when they're on his boat. They have like a Geiger counter, and this is the gadget where he has the one he gives Domino in the movie, the camera Geiger counter. They have that, but when Leiter's using it, you can plug it into your wristwatch and like you see the readings on your wristwatch. And Leiter is doing that while they're on the yacht because they think that maybe the bombs might be on the yacht, and so they're trying to use the Geiger counter to see if they're on the yacht. And there's this great detail where when they get on the yacht, Leiter's like, do we have time for this? Like he kind of like makes a big show of like, we have that appointment, blah blah blah. And then so the rest of the time they're on the yacht, Leiter keeps checking his watch as part of the cover story. Like, we got to get to that appointment, but he's actually like looking at the Geiger counter thing that he's carrying around. Anyways, interesting. All that stuff's just way more interesting.
Yeah, that feels like way more in line with what I would expect from a spy story, as like going undercover and being a spy.
Yes, yeah, and that's what the book is.
So then there's another scene at Largo's estate, and I believe this is at night when he sneaks back in to try to find Paula, who's been captured.
Yes.
And then he's climbing the roof, and he gives himself away by dropping his gun. He like drops his gun and it fires. Is any of that from the book?
None of that scene is in the book at all. He never like breaks in at night to do anything, but it's actually that moment where he drops the gun is one of the only moments in the film that reflected an element of the book that surprised me the most. But we'll have more on that later because I have that in a later section.
Intrigue.
Yes.
Okay. How about the scene where he's trapped in the pool with the sharks?
No, so the Pool of Sharks is a complete movie edition that is not remotely anything in the book. Bond does deal with some sea creatures quite a few times in the book, but that's always in the ocean. He's like, whenever that happens, it's in the ocean. And I will have more on that later because there are several interactions with some fauna in the ocean that is pretty interesting.
Excellent. Speaking of interesting interactions, so Fiona, the dangerous, sexy redhead, returns, and Bond just has sex with her. Does he have?
Again,
she's not from the book.
Not in the books. Not in the book because her character's not in the book, but it tracks. Bond will have sex with literally any woman that he finds attractive. He does not care. Like he's a horn dog. Like that is his whole thing. Both in the books and the movies. Absolutely, totally in line with his character. Again, this specific one does not happen in the book because she's not in the book. But
if she were,
he would absolutely have sex with her. Yes, unquestionably. One of my favorite scenes or moments from that scene in the movie is her line is so good. Where at like before or right after or during them having sex, she has this line where she turns to him and she goes, "You like wild things, Mr. Bond, James Bond." The way she says that, Mr. Bond, James Bond, is so funny to me. I love it.
So then they capture him after he has sex with her.
Yeah.
Foolish decision,
yes,
in my opinion. Because then they capture him and he gets away from them. And we're in the midst of the Junkanoo.
Yes.
Which they say is like a Mardi Gras.
Yeah.
Type celebration that they have on this island. And there's this parade going on. And he evades them for a while by hiding inside of a parade float. Does that happen in the book?
So none of this scene is from the book, and it's actually one of the random things that I really enjoy about Bond movies in general. Is that from my memory, the Bond movies love including unique regional cultural like celebrations and stuff in the films. I think you could argue it's maybe a bit exploitative or tokenizing, but it seems like they legit just film the actual things happening. Like to me, this looks like they're just at the actual parade filming. It doesn't seem like they do like some weird fake version of it for movies. It seems like they're literally just filming. Red Letter Media calls it shooting the rodeo, where like if you want to add like some production value to your movie, if you're in a place and there's like a rodeo going on, you like go to the rodeo and film there because it's like a big event that you can film at, and it like you don't have to do anything. Like it's just like you can go, you know what I mean?
Stuff happening.
It's just stuff happening already that you can kind of include in your movie to like up the production value without really doing anything yourself. And the Bond movies, from my memory, actually do this quite a bit with, like I said, like local cultural things, which again is interesting. And I will say, like, in this one, I looked up, this is a real thing, the Giancano thing. It's actually named after a guy named John, like, Canoe, or I don't know how it's pronounced, who was, like, a slave. It's like, so it was a thing that started during slavery in the Bahamas as, like, a way to celebrate, that the slaves did as, like, a celebration that they were allowed to do or something like that. So it's some sort of, again, specifically Bahamian cultural thing that goes on there. And again, they do this in a lot of the movies. And I've always thought it was kind of, as a kid, I was always like, well, that's interesting. Like, I've never seen that before.
I had questions, though, about how long this parade went on, because he takes Domino to the parade and then leaves. And I believe this is when he goes to try to find Paula.
Yeah.
And like
and then
goes
goes
to Largo's estate, gets captured, escapes, comes back, has sex, and then gets captured again and escapes, and the parade is still happening.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It is wild. It is pretty wild.
But so he ends up getting cornered by them again in this like nightclub type place.
Yes. He's running and he gets away, but he gets into a nightclub
Yeah.
and they find him again.
Yeah, so he's dancing.
The Kiss Kiss Club, which we talked about in the prequel.
Yes.
Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is what some Italian reviewer called James Bond.
So he's dancing with Fiona in this nightclub, and sees all of her henchmen surrounding them, and then one of them goes to shoot, and he spins around and uses her back to catch the bullet before it can hit him, and then like throws her down in a chair and immediately makes a joke about the fact that she's dead.
She's dead. Yeah.
Anything like that in the book?
Nothing like that happens in the book. I actually kind of hate this scene. I think I have a note about it later. It's like my least favorite part of the movie because I just don't. It's so weirdly shot to me and like paced, and I'm just not a big fan of it. But Bond quipping after killing people is a movie classic. Less so a thing in the book. Again, at least in this book, he's not super quippy in this book. But he has some good lines, but he's not like a one-liner after killing people kind of guy like he is in the movies. But in the movies, that is one of Bond's staples is quippy one-liners after killing somebody.
Sweet.
Yeah.
So then we cut to the next day, and he's out swimming, or no, maybe this is a couple days later. I don't remember. He's swimming with Domino, and she steps on like a sea urchin.
Yes.
And she's like, "Oh no, it's venomous." And then he sucks the venom out of her foot.
Yep.
In a scene that I'm sure has launched a million fetishes. Does he do that in the book?
Yes. Yes. So this scene is pretty much identical to the book, except in the book it's foreplay to them having sex instead of the post-sex scene.
Right.
She steps on the sea urchin, and then he sucks the spines out of her feet, and then he carries her into a tent on the beach, and then they have sex. So, but yes, that is exactly what happens in the book.
Cool. Does Bond straight up harpoon gun the creepy Spectre guy?
Unfortunately, Bond harpoons 0 people in this book, actually. More on that later. I do like this scene a lot. He kills Vargas in the scene, which I think is in the, I think that guy might be in the, I can't remember if he's in the book or not. But I love that he harpoons that guy and again gets to drop a great one-liner. I think he got the point. It's great.
Jesus.
It's great. It's great.
So Domino is now helping Bond, and she's going to take the camera Geiger counter and go aboard the yacht and see if she can figure out if the nuclear bombs are aboard the yacht.
Yeah.
But Largo catches her, and he is going to torture her with a cigarette and ice cubes.
Yes.
Does that happen in the book?
Yes. And in the book, he actually does torture her. In the film, he like is interrupted almost immediately.
We see she has like one.
Yeah, she has like one burn.
Shoulder.
Yeah, I know. In the book, when Bond finds her again at the end of the novel, she is like covered in welts and burns and is severely injured. So I actually appreciated that the movie limited that quite a bit. We don't read it in the book. Like, it's the end of a chapter. It's like he comes in and he's like, now you would talk, blah, blah, blah. And he does like this. The speech is almost identical to the movie about how she's given him pleasure and now he's got to give her pain or whatever. And then the chapter ends with him like leaning towards her, and then we cut away. And we don't, like, again, it's not like described or anything like that. But when we do see her later, she's like severely injured because of the torture. So I appreciated that the movie didn't feel the need to like severely torture our female lead.
Yeah.
Was nice.
So at this point now, we know that the bombs are there, and they've called in the cavalry. And I wanted to know if in the book these different organizations like airdrop a bunch of secret agents down into the ocean.
No, they do not. And I actually much prefer this in the book. In the book, Felix Leiter calls a submarine that he has like on standby, called the Manta, I believe. that him and Bond then get onto the Manta to chase the Disco Volante, because the Disco Volante is leaving. And they're gotta follow it because they don't know for sure. Like, they're still, like, at this point in the movie or novel, it's pretty towards the end, but they're still not 100% sure that he has the bombs or what he's doing, or like they don't know for sure what's going on. And at this point, he has sent Domino onto the ship to like signal if she finds the bombs with the Geiger counter, but they never hear anything from her, so they don't know for sure what's going on, but they want to follow the Disco Volante leaves, and they're going to follow it in this submarine that they get on. And then while on this submarine, once the Disco Volante stops and like docks and they think like they're going to move the bombs or whatever, they recruit 10 divers from the sub. And they get like escape pod launched out of the sub like torpedoes to go attack Largo's crew. It's pretty great. Also, the sub captain is a fun character named Peter Peterson. He also smokes a pipe on the sub. Like, when they meet him, he's like in his office on a submarine smoking a pipe, which just cracked me up. That would not fly at all. I'm pretty sure these days, you know, they don't let you smoke on fucking submarines. It's like terribly dangerous.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's smoking a pipe in his submarine office when they meet him for the first time. And he's a fun character, but yeah. I believe in maybe the remake of this, the Never Say Never Again one or whatever. I think they might do the sub scene in that one. I remember, or maybe it's a different movie entirely. I remember Bond getting shot out of like a torpedo tube in a movie. And so it might be that one. Because in this one, yeah, he gets shot up. They call it an escape pod, but they like compressed air like shoots him out of the submarine, and then him and the other divers or whatever, so that they can go fight Largo. It's pretty great.
So then they've airdropped all of these secret agents into the ocean. And meanwhile, the bad guys are moving this bomb underwater. And then they all fight in lines.
They square off like it's
water. They fight in
American
lines.
Revolutionary War.
Like they're just like swimming over each other. Do they fight in lines underwater in the book?
So this scene's kind of close to the book. I would say they don't fight in lines. And the big difference that I really like in the book is that in the book, Bond and the Navy divers actually don't have spear guns. They just have knives, and knives literally taped to broomsticks to use as spears. It sounds silly, but like they didn't come prepared to like wage an underwater war. Like they're like, it's like a submarine. They have like guns and stuff, but they don't have like, this is not what they normally do. So they don't have a bunch of spear guns or whatever. Whereas Largo's guys do, because their whole thing, they know they're going to be taking this underwater or whatever, and they need to attack. Mainly, they have the spear guns primarily for fish. They're not even, like, Largo and his crew is not even that worried about people. They mainly have the spear guns for, like, sharks and stuff.
I mean, that's fair. You're underwater. Yeah. Why would you be that worried about people?
Yeah. So Bond and his guys, they just have knives and broomstick spears. And the cool thing is that they actually have to like stealthily ambush Largo's men who do have spear guns, or they'll get killed before they can even get to them. So in the book, they have to like sneak up on them, basically. Like once they finally see them, they like make sure they like stay behind them and to the side of them and like swim up, as obviously silently because they're underwater, but like they swim up behind them and like try to get as close as they can so that they can attack them. And they do realize while they're still a little bit away and a couple guys get speared, but they're able to get close enough that they don't all just get wiped out by spear guns before they're able to get to them. I get why the movie gives our good guys spear guns. I get it. We get this big battle where they're all. It would seem weird if like, it wouldn't be as fun if like only half the guys had spear guns and our other guys are like. I get it. Give them both spear guns. We get this big like underwater like you said, like line battle military fight thing. But I just really preferred in the book kind of the underdog status our heroes have, because they just don't have the weapons to go against Largo's men in this final battle. They're also outnumbered. Like I think Largo's has like 15 or 20 men. I think it's 15 men, and Bond has like 10.
So my last question here: does Domino get to kill Largo? Because I really liked that. Yes, and this was actually my favorite and most surprising part of the book. I was not expecting it at all. I had seen this movie and I completely forgot that happened. I will have more on this later, but this happens underwater in the book.
But Bond is getting his, again, I do like this slightly better in the book, but it's similar. Bond in the book is getting his ass kicked by Largo and is like literally going to die. Like Largo is like choking him to death underwater or something like that. And then he just notices that Largo lets go of him and he opens his eyes and then sees Largo with a spear through his chest just floating there. And then he looks around Largo and sees Domino behind him loading another spear into her spear gun. It's fantastic. It's so good. And then so Largo dies. And then he swims over to Domino, and this is when he realizes she's like super injured, and like she was able to escape on her own. She's not like let go by the physicist or whatever in the book like she is in the movie. She's just able to escape. They don't really ever explain how. She's just able to escape somehow. But when he gets over to her, he realizes that like she can barely swim, like she's like severely injured, and so they have to swim together to the surface because they're both like really injured and fucked up. Again, the movie's version is fine, but I just really enjoyed how it played out in the book, and it really did surprise me that they let Domino kill him. I thought it was great. I was a big fan. Loved it. A+. All right, those are all Katie's questions for Was That in the Book? But she's got a few more. She was a little confused about things, so we're going to talk about that stuff in Lost in Adaptation.
Just show me the way to get out of here, and I'll be on my way.
Was it lost?
Yes, and I want to get unlost as soon as possible.
Okay, I guess I have already had this question answered, but I was kind of especially confused at the beginning of this movie because I felt like we didn't really get properly introduced to a lot of characters, and a lot of them were like very similar looking. So I spent like the first half hour or so of this film just like swimming in confusion. But one of the first things that I was really confused about was that if the guy who tried to kill Bond on the stretching machine was the same guy that he then traps in the steam box.
Yes. Yeah, that was Count Lipa. So he's one of Spectre's like lower sub operators. He doesn't have a number, or he does, but he's like sub operator 6. He doesn't not one of the main guys or whatever. And he's actually at this health clinic that Bond is at, which is called Shrublands. He's there to keep an eye and facilitate the whole plot with the pilot.
Right.
Again, it's similar to the movie, but without the face surgery stuff. He's basically he's just kind of the handler for this pilot to make sure everything goes off without a hitch for this pilot. And he does try to kill Bond after he hears Bond talking to headquarters about him on the phone. But I much prefer the whole scene in the book where Bond gets revenge after the whole stretching machine thing. Because in the movie, he seems to just kind of stumble upon this. He's just like walking down a hallway and is like, oh, look, it's the guy that tried to kill me. I'll just lock him in this thing. In the book, he plans all of this out. He like crafts this whole plot to get revenge on Count Lipa, and he mimics the voice of one of the workers so that he gets all the workers. He knows when all the workers are going to go on lunch or whatever, and that he knows Count Lipa's whole schedule. Like he keeps track of his whole schedule and what he does every day and when he's going to be in this. I think it's called a Turkish sauna. When he's going to be in this thing, and he like figures it all out, and then he knows that they're going to go. All the workers are going to go on lunch, and then he talks to the one worker who he knows will be responsible for letting Lipa out, and it's like, hey, why don't you go take an early? Like he does something. I can't remember the details, but he finagles this whole thing. And then when like the supervisor yells down and is like, hey, make sure you get Count Lipa out of the Turkish thing or whatever, to the guy who's supposed to be doing it, who's already gone at this point because Bond did something to like get him out of there. Bond like pretends to be that guy and is like, oh yeah, I'll take care of it. And like, it's this whole plot basically. It's way more interesting. I get why the movie streamlines that. It's a whole lot for a kind of irrelevant scene because his character dies like in 5 minutes in both the book and the movie. But the thing I like about it in the book is that it really lets us see, this is our first instance of like seeing how good Bond is at this, like the way he like keeps track of everybody's schedules, and he knows exactly what time every worker goes on break and does all this stuff. It's like our introduction in this book, at least, to like how good of a spy Bond is or whatever. And so I liked that a lot about the book. Whereas again, where in the movie, he's just like, oh, I guess I'll just do this. Again, it's fine, but I prefer it in the book.
So I might have missed an explanation for this in the movie, but so they're gonna steal these atomic bombs that are on this flight, and they say that it's a training flight.
Yes.
But my question is, why did they have actual functioning atomic weapons on board a training flight?
So I also had this question. Do not recall it being answered in the book. Did some searching, could not find a satisfying answer why that would be the case.
So weird, because all you have to do is not say that it's a training flight, right?
Well, I mean, it would have to be a training flight because they wouldn't be going to use them.
Sure.
So
but
it
they
needs to
could
be
just
some sort of training flight.
transporting them, right?
True. Yeah. No, but it is a training. It is a training flight in the book. I don't know what. The only thing I could think is that maybe the training flight is they use the real thing because for the purposes of the drilling of like what they're doing, they want the level of attention to detail and seriousness of using the. I don't know.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know if the book, if it does say why they use the actual nukes in this training exercise,
Right.
I don't know why, but it is the same. It is a training exercise, and there is real nukes for some reason, and I also had that
It
question.
just seems like a
so
wild risk.
I agree. I don't have an answer for you on that one.
All right. Well, I also wanted to know about Paula because I wasn't sure. And again, this might be something that I did not catch in the movie. Like, what is her role?
So she's not in the book at all.
Uh-huh.
I did like adding her. It was a better in the movie thing I had. Apparently, I thought she was part of, which I guess she does have an American accent, but I thought she was like from MI6 or whatever. I thought she was like another field agent from MI6. But in the credits on Wikipedia, she's credited as a CIA agent, like as like she's like a friend, or not friend, but like working with Leiter basically, who's just there helping. Her role, I don't know. She's just another field agent there, like helping or whatever. I liked that we just that we actually get like a woman field agent, because it's it's that we don't get any of them in the book, and it's the book goes out of its way to express the fact that everybody who does this is men in their 30s. So yeah, I enjoyed having her be there because it was at least interesting. She gets a little bit of the short shrift in the film, in my opinion, which we'll talk about. But yeah, No real explanation. Again, nothing from the book because he's not in it. But I don't really have much to add of like what her specific reason for being there was, other than just to like help on the mission.
So my next question, and the reason that I have this here was because, so the movie implies that Bond and Domino are scuba diving.
Yes.
And then the movie implies that they have sex underwater while scuba diving, which to me seems like it would be difficult, if not impossible.
Difficult at best. Yeah.
And I'm wondering if do they have sex scuba diving? They have scuba sex. The movie isn't.
I think the movie is implying that.
Yeah.
Okay, so none of this is in the book. It's not at all in the book. It makes no sense. I agree. In the book, Domino, like I said earlier, is coming back from a dive, and Bond's waiting for her on the beach, and she steps on a sea urchin, or she said she steps on a sea urchin while she was in the sea, and that's when he sucks the sea urchin's spine out of her foot, and then they have sex.
Right.
I will say, so this is the kind of cheeky sex scenes that the Bond movies love doing. They always have these kind of ridiculous, like, part of it is like the PG rating. It's like, oh, could they be having sex? The fact that it makes no sense that they would be having sex is part of how they get away with.
Right. That's fair.
With what they're doing there. Because I read a thing actually in the prequel that I didn't include in the notes, that in that scene originally, the director or the script or something included when all those bubbles come up, you would originally see her bikini top like floating up or whatever, and they got rid of that because that was too scandalous or whatever, supposedly.
I mean, that's interesting.
That's what they say, at least.
Considering some of the other
I agree.
scenes in the movie.
I agree. I don't know how true that is, because like, okay, but also we see plenty of other scenes where women are nude or like topless and like covering it with blankets or in a tub, like, oh, whatever. So I don't know. Again, I don't know how true that is, but again, the movies do love this kind of sex scene, or at least these early movies do, where it's like a funny, silly, like, maybe they were like kissing, like, but obviously they weren't kissing. They're wearing scuba gear. It's the kind of sex scenes you get in Bond movies. It doesn't really make sense. The point is you're supposed to kind of blush and chuckle and go, ooh, and then like not think about it too much.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Who was the guy that untied Domino on board the yacht?
Yes. So that character's name is Kotza, or I don't know how to pronounce it. I believe he's Polish. I think.
Mm-hmm.
He's and he is this in the movie as well. He's a nuclear physicist that Spectre recruited to help with the bombs, basically.
Okay.
His whole job is to basically fix the bombs so that, or like fuss with the bombs so that they can be used with a timer as opposed to like dropped from like a plane, because they have to like pull the front off of them and put some special detonator things on them so that they can, like, with timers or whatever. And that's his job, which he does mention in the movie. And then he mentions that he throws the detonators overboard because he like grows a conscience or whatever. None of that's from the book. He just is part of the plot the whole time until the end. Like, he doesn't have that redemptive moment in the book. But at the end, he is arrested. Like, it's mentioned in like the summary. There's like the final chapter of this book. Leiter comes in to Bond in the hospital and is like explains everything that happened.
Here's the report.
Yeah, it's like at the end of Psycho where they like the detective comes in and is like, so here's all what happened. We get that scene in this, and he explains that this physicist like basically just, he says he like sang like a jailbird or whatever. And he just like tells the whole plot and everything, so they know all the details. But he does not like save Domino or anything like that. But that's who he is. He's a physicist there to help with the nuclear bombs.
Okay. Yeah, I was laughing really hard at the end of this movie because they show him jumping off of the boat with Bond and Domino.
Yes.
And then he just vanishes.
Yes. Absolutely. Again, in the book, he's just arrested. There's no big like boat chase or crash or anything, but that cracked me up too. And I don't know if you noticed, but in the summary for that you read from Wikipedia, the trio quickly flees Disco Volante barely before its destruction, whereupon Kutza vanishes and Bond and Domino are retrieved by a plane.
he jumps off the boat and then he's just gone.
To be fair, they do give him a floaty device, but yeah, they just leave him there. Apparently, he's just gone. All right, those are all of Katie's questions. It's time to find out what I thought now was better in the book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
So I mentioned this before, but the reason Bond is going to Shrublands, the health resort, is way more interesting in the book. I have some sub notes here that I just want to kind of run through. Like, he gets a medical report, and I just want to talk about on his medical report, he has to tell him how much he smokes and how much he drinks. James Bond smokes 60 cigarettes a day and drinks half a bottle of liquor every single day.
Oh, that's so many cigarettes.
So many cigarettes. And a lot of alcohol. Oh my God. But anyways, so M is basically sending him to Shrublands to like get his health in order. And M goes on this rant that cracked me up and made me like roll my eyes about how everything these days is artificial and terrible for us.
Good.
And I was like, oh my God. So he's gonna send him to the Shrublands to detox with the naturopaths. And initially, I thought the book was going to be sympathetic to naturopathy or whatever, but I actually don't think it is, because M is sympathetic to it. But I think we're supposed to be we're definitely like I don't want to say the write-in character, not the write-in character. What's the term? The character that Fleming most like identifies or is putting his voice through. What is it? Oh my God, there's a term that I'm just blanking on. Anyways, the character that I think we're supposed to kind of agree with the most and that is voicing the author's opinions is James Bond, I think, for the most part. And he has a line once he gets to Shrublands that I thought was very good, where he goes, H-Man, which is what they call the healers at Shrublands, H-Man stood for Health Man, which was a smart thing to call oneself if you were a naturopath, which I thought was good, is like kind of acknowledging that it's all bullshit. So I think the book is actually kind of critical of naturopathy. And then after the whole thing where Bond gets almost killed in the torsion stretching machine. They're treating him at the resort, and he says he wants a real doctor and not one of these grated carrot merchants, which I thought was really good. He's like, I need to get to a real doctor and not one of these grated carrot merchants. So the thing that maybe surprised me the most that I was not expecting, that I've mentioned earlier, is Bond's vulnerability in this book. It's not something I remotely expected, having only ever watched the movies. And you mentioned a couple of moments in the movie that a little bit of this comes through, but very subtly as compared to what's in the book. So, and the first moment of this is that on page 32, when he's getting ready, when Patricia is going to put him on the torsion machine, the spine stretching machine thing, he's actually like really nervous about it. Like he like, not in like a playful, funny way. He's like actively nervous about it in a way that I thought was really interesting. Which again, Bond being nervous is not a thing I identify with Bond's character from the movies, like, at all. Like, he's just not a nervous guy. Like, he's the whole thing of Bond is like he's super calm, cool, and collected all the time.
Yeah.
Like that is who Bond is. But he's like super nervous about getting on this machine or whatever, and he like makes Patricia like explain exactly how it works before he'll even get on it or whatever. Then later, after he's been at this resort for a while, he actually starts to feel a lot better. He's like, oh, it's nice not waking up with a hangover every morning, and like I can breathe and blah 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 because I'm not smoking 60 cigarettes a day and all this sort of stuff. But he actually begins to like become really worried and introspective about the fact that he feels like a completely different person, and like, is he even himself if he doesn't have his vices and all this sort of stuff?
That's heavy.
Yeah, like he gets into this whole thing. He's like, who am I if I'm not drinking and smoking and all this sort of stuff. But he does, don't worry. He has 3 desires still, despite his change in his personality from being at this resort for a few weeks. He has 3 desires that still make him feel like himself. He really wants some spaghetti and wine. He wants to fuck Patricia, and he wants to get revenge on Count Lipa. And those 3 things, he's like, okay, I'm still me. I want to kill a guy, I want to have sex with a woman, and I want to eat some spaghetti and drink wine. There's another moment later. So throughout this whole book, the movie never really implies this, but Bond and Leiter both think they're kind of on a fool's errand. They think they've been sent to the Bahamas, like, to get them out of the way, kind of.
Right. Interesting.
And especially Leiter, but even Bond, they don't think there's really anything. They're like, probably nothing important going on here. And so as Bond starts to get more and more evidence, he keeps considering whether or not he should report back and be like, I think I got a lead here. I think I got something going on. And there's like several moments throughout this where he's like really doubts himself, and he's worried of like making a fool of himself. He doesn't want to like report stuff and like get like people involved if it's not going to turn out to be like real or whatever. And so he really doubts himself a lot, which again, self-doubt is not a thing, a characteristic I remotely associate with James Bond. There's another scene I'll mention later where a man gets bitten by a barracuda, and Bond nearly throws up when he sees this happen. Like he like almost throws, he's like scuba diving and he almost throws up in his mask, like when he sees this man get like attacked by this barracuda, which again, the idea of Bond being like queasy at like violence is not a thing I remotely identify with Bond. Also the barracuda then gets like messed up by the grenades, which happens in the movie. They're throwing grenades in the water. In that scene, that's where the barracuda is, and the barracuda gets like, I don't know, it doesn't get hit by one of the grenades, but like the pressure wave like fucks with the barracuda. And as Bond is like swimming away trying to escape, the barracuda swims past him like freaking out. And he's like, that's his reaction. Bond is like, feels really bad.
Poor little guy.
Yeah, he feels really bad for this barracuda that he's like, well, that's gonna die. He's like, it's gonna go get like it's pressure bladder or something got messed up, and then like a shark's gonna eat it or whatever, and he like feels really bad about it. And then the last note I had for this is that when they find the plane and Bond dives down to like go inspect the plane for evidence or whatever, He swims in amongst all the dead bodies that are on the plane, and he gets super creeped out by it. And then when he gets them evidence or whatever, and then when he gets back to the surface, he gets so like skeeved out that he like rips all of his scuba gear off and just like lets it sink to like he just like has to get it off of himself because it's like it's like contaminated, or you know what I mean, like because he was down amongst all these dead bodies. Again, just all of these little moments of Bond being like a normal person, which is not what I think of when I think of James Bond in the movies. James Bond in the movies, at least in the old movies, the modern ones, they play a lot more with his vulnerability and stuff. It's like a more humanized Bond or whatever. But yeah, the old movies, he's just like the coolest, most composed guy ever. Yeah. And that is not the case in this book, which I thought was very interesting. So a good thing that is not in the book that is in the movie is that Bond blackmails Patricia into sex in the film. Great. Where after she's like injured on the machine or whatever, she's like, oh, please don't tell anybody. He's like, well, I won't tell anybody if you have sex with me. I will say it's not remotely out of character. It's very much in character of Bond, but it's at least one terrible thing that he does not do in the book. As I mentioned in the intro quote, Bond actually hates tea. He calls it the time-wasting opium of the masses, which I thought was really funny. But he gets into tea when he's at the health resort because it's the only thing he can drink that's remotely interesting. Is that he can put some like he goes to like these tea houses and can put like sugar in his tea, and it's like liquor to him because it's. Other than that, he's drinking like hot water with lemon juice in it and like nothing else or whatever. There's a moment in the book that is not in the movie where Moneypenny, who's in this movie a couple times, she's like a main character in the whole series. She is M's secretary. She comforts Bond that eventually he'll go back to normal. Like because this is like when he's questioning like. Who am I without my vices and all this sort of stuff and blah, blah. And she's kind of comforting him and being like, look, you'll get back to normal eventually. M goes to this health resort every now and then. And every time he does, he's like a new man for 3 weeks. And then he goes back to drinking and smoking again. Like she's like, you'll get over it, basically. And she has this really interesting line where she says that men are better when she goes, yeah, it's men tend to have drinking problems, but men are better when they're drinking because while they're awful, at least they don't think they're gods. Like her argument is that like, it's actually like, or not her argument, but what she's saying is that it's actually good when men drink because it like humbles them, because it like weakens them. And if they're like the version of Bond that comes back from the health resort like feels invincible because he's like he wakes up at like 5 a.m. and he's like this perfect specimen and he's like he could take over the world. He feels like a god basically. And she's like the liquor like dulls that, and men need that. they need to not feel like gods, which I just thought was interesting. I don't know, it's whatever. There's a moment where Bond in the book switches to healthier cigarettes. Ooh. He switches from these very intense, like I think they're from some European country, cigarettes that have like a lot of tar and nicotine in them. He switches to some cigarettes that are like better for you or whatever.
Camel lights. Yeah,
basically. And he's like, this is part of his whole changed man thing. Yeah. He also has a Scottish housekeeper who's a lot of fun. Who gives him shit for his weird eating when he comes back from the health clinic. She's like, you can need to eat real food, but she does it with a very thick Scottish accent. Anyways, she's a lot of fun in the book. She doesn't make an appearance in the movie. When the plane lands, or when the pilot lands the plane and it's sinking under the water, they shoot a big floodlight at it, and I really wanted to see that in the movie because the way it's described in the book sounds really creepy. Like they put a light under the water and shoot it at the plane so that there's this big illuminated like circle of light where you see the plane sinking down, and it really triggered like the thalassophobia. You know what that is? It's like the fear of like
deep water.
Yeah. Like and things underwater or whatever. Like it felt like it would be super creepy. And so I was disappointed that wasn't in the movie because I thought it would look cool. When Bond introduces himself to Domino, he has this great line. He does the "I'm Bond, James Bond," but I think she's like smoking a cigarette or says something about like giving up cigarettes, and he goes, "Bond, James Bond, I'm the world's authority on giving up smoking. I do it constantly," which is a good line. Then him and Domino go to get brunch. at this like little restaurant, and Bond says, "It's exactly midday. Do you want to drink solid or soft?" And Domino says, "Soft. I'll have a double Bloody Mary with extra Worcestershire sauce." And he's like, "Soft? If that's soft, what's hard?" And she's like, "If it doesn't," she says something. She has some weird rule for what is like hard drinking. But apparently Bloody Mary's is like, that's a soft drink, basically. So in the movie, they send Bond to Nassau because of Domino's brother thing connection. I'll talk more about that here in just a second. But in the movie, or in the book, I really prefer that the reason they're sending Bond to Nassau is just because M has a hunch. And again, Bond thinks it's like nothing probably. And is like, well, whatever, I'll just go get a suntan and like hang out. But it ends up being like the real deal. Another thing, and this kind of goes into some of your questions. This movie is just such a Cliff Notes version of the plot that I was legitimately interested to see how much of it you could even follow. And you followed about what I expected, where you were confused about as much as I thought you would be, and were able to follow about as much as I thought, because it doesn't have the connective tissue that the book does. And I was like, wait, what's going on now? And I read the fucking book that it's based on, so. A little detail in the book that I thought was interesting from a writing style perspective is that there's actually kind of a non-linear narrative, whereas it's actually pretty common for one chapter to explain events from before the previous chapter. So, like, in particular, there's a moment, like an example of this, and it doesn't happen a ton, but it happens like 2 or 3 times in the book, where we have a chapter where Bond meets Domino. He like meets Domino, and they like, that's where they like have brunch and hang out, and he's like getting all this information from her. And then in the next chapter, he actually finds out about Domino. Like we get the backstory of how he knew who Domino was when he met her.
Interesting.
Like we get like, again, it kind of like explains like, oh yeah, so he did all this like research and stuff of like,
so you get Largo like a scene, and then you get like more detail.
Not even later. More detail. You get like what happened prior to that previous scene happening. Oh,
interesting.
Kind of. And it doesn't happen every single time, and it kind of stops like halfway through, but some of the earlier chapters, we get a handful of those scenes, similar with the plane landing. We get the pilot on the plane stealing the plane and all that stuff, and then after that we get his backstory and how they recruited him and blah blah blah. So like we get just a little bit of nonlinear storytelling there that I thought was interesting, that obviously the movie doesn't really do. Blofeld's backstory is super interesting in the book. This may show up in other movies. It doesn't show up in this one, but we get the backstory of how he built his fortune, and like how he became the leader of Spectre. It's really interesting because he's like this very promising student who gets a job in the Ministry of Communication, and everybody's like surprised that this like up and comer gets this kind of like boring job, but he uses it to then like sell secrets. Like he's getting all this like messages and stuff coming through. Basically he sells information to like the Nazis and stuff during World War II, and he like pretends he has this big network of spies, but all it is him using the names of people from the messages he's stealing. He's basically selling information, pretending he's part of this big network, but it's just him stealing like letters and stuff, basically. I thought it was interesting. And again, that's just kind of how he like built his fortune and rose to power and becomes the leader of Spectre, essentially. And then he does create the organization that he pretended he had from the beginning, essentially. The little detail, the Spectre people rotate their numbers every month. So in the movie, and I think in all the movies going forward, Spectre is always just, Blofeld is always number 1. And then there's other people who are like descending numbers of people, basically. Yeah. But in the movie, or in the book, every month they rotate numbers, so that some months Blofeld is number 1, but the next month he's number 2, the next month he's number 3, so that they're never the same, I guess for like covert reasons or whatever.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Again, I get why the movie changes it to make it more consistent. At least it seems like they changed it. But as fun as the Pool of Sharks is in the movie, I thought Largo's whole thing where they're gonna like, they come across Bond struggling in the pool and they're gonna shoot him, and then Largo's like, "No, I've got a better idea." It's really dumb. Again, it's classic Bond stuff. It's fun, but it's dumb. Like, I get it, but I also hate it. I don't know. Also, there's a moment in this scene in the movie where when he gets in the tunnel and he's swimming away, one of the sharks swims by, and this is the thing we talked about in the prequel where they have plexiglass separating him from the shark. Why he has his hand on the plexiglass in that shot in the movie, so you can tell there's a wall there. Like, why would
notice?
his hand is like flat against the plexiglass as the shark swims by, and I'm like, just don't have your hand. It's so dumb. Anyways, drove me crazy. Really cool little moment that, again, Domino is this fascinating character in the book. She's so cool. And she tells, when Bond takes her after the casino scene where Largo loses a bunch of money, Bond takes her for a drink. They hang out in the bar, and she tells him this big, long story about this man she calls Hero, who is on the Player's cigarette pack, and which is a real thing. If you look up the Player's cigarette pack from back in the day, there's this guy who's like a sailor, and his hat says Hero on it, and he's got like these boats behind him. And she tells Bond this whole story about how as a child she was infatuated with this character, and she creates this whole imaginary mythology, like romantic mythology, about this picture of a sailor on the Player's cigarette pack. And she goes into all this detail. It's like 5 or 6 pages about how Hero actually painted Hero, who is what she calls this guy on this packet because his hat says Hero. He actually painted the pictures that are on the cigarette packs and sold the paintings to the guys who owned the cigarette company. And originally his paintings had a mermaid in them, but that's not on the cover of the cigarette pack because the mermaid was topless and they couldn't have that on their cigarette pack because one of the owners was a Quaker and he would not allow that. And like, she has this whole like rich tapestry of a story she invented, and it's just like a dive into kind of like the character that Domino is. And again, she just has so much more depth and layers in the book than she does in the film.
Interesting.
So this is a very big one to me, and we mentioned this earlier, but the reveal of Domino being the sister of the dead pilot is so boring in the movie because we just find out immediately.
Yes.
It's just like immediate. In the book, we know that the pilot's last name is Patachi, like the whole time. Like as soon as we're introduced to him, we know his name's like something Patachi or whatever. Then, like 3/4 of the way through the book, during this conversation, Domino reveals, because in the book her name's like Domino Vitali or something like that. But she reveals in this scene that that's a stage name and that her actual last name is Patachi. And that she has, and then she also mentions this brother that she has that she loves dearly, who's back in Italy and who's like a super good pilot. And we already know what has happened to him at this point, and it's this big bombshell reveal of like, oh shit, her brother's dead. No.
Yeah.
It's such a good twist. It like knocked my socks off while I was reading because I was not expecting it at all. I thought it was super fascinating and cool. Or I say cool, just like a super clever twist that added a lot of depth and nuance to her character. It also, because we know her backstory and she has this very like kind of like hard knock upbringing, it explains. And when she's talking about her upbringing and her brother, it explains why her brother was so ready to like take the money, basically, because they both come from this sort of like rough upbringing where they've kind of fought and scratched their way for all of their money their whole lives. And her brother actually has a really good career as this like successful pilot, but he still has this like, and so anyways, this is a rich tapestry of character backgrounds that the movie just kind of does not give a shit at all about. So I was very disappointed when it just is revealed immediately. Oh, look, hey, that's the pilot that was dead. That's just her brother. It was like the first thing we find out in the movie before we even meet Domino. I was like, all right, fine. A little detail, when they're flying to go look, when Leiter and Bond are flying to go look for the bomb, they see an intercontinental missile test happening, and they get yelled at by like the on the radio, like, hey, you got to get out of here, we're testing an intercontinental missile. and then whatever, and then Bond reminisces about Moonraker, which is a different Bond story, which is fun. How they find the plane in the ocean works better in the book, in my opinion. It's very similar, but in the movie, the guy's like, oh, that's the Golden Lagoon. Nobody goes there because the sharks.
Yeah.
In the book, Bond sees the sharks and is like, that's interesting. Why are the sharks circling there? There must be something going on there. And then as he looks closer, he sees the sharks fussing with some ropes under the water. And it's the ropes that are holding the tarp over the plane or whatever. So it just kind of, again, to me, makes a little more sense in the book or than the movie does. Another detail that makes Domino more interesting is when they're on the beach and Bond recruits her to help. Like, hey, I'm going to give you this Geiger counter. You're going to go on the yacht and see if you can find the bombs. He's like, if you find the bombs, go into your room and switch your light on and off like 4 times, and then we'll know that you found the bombs. And she's like, that's fucking dumb. People only do that in movies. Or like she's like, that's a terrible idea. And she goes, instead, if I find the bombs, I'll come back up onto the deck of the boat, and then you'll know that I have the bombs. And which is what Bond suggests in the movie.
Yeah.
So the movie just takes her better version of the plan and gives it to Bond initially, whereas in the book she's like, "You're dumb. That's dumb. I'm gonna do this instead," which I liked. There's a little plot detail where before they're about to go out on their diving mission, one of the Russian members of Spectre suspects that because they're only taking like half of the Spectre people out to go take the bomb to plant it, and this Russian guy is nervous that the other people on the boat are gonna just like leave them and like take the money and like fuck off. And so he suggests that instead of it being like the specific group of 10 people, that they instead take like one person from each of the different like organizations that make up Spectre, like the Russian mafia. He's like, let's do that because in that way we know we can trust. And Largo's like, counterpoint, how about I shoot you in the face 3 times, and just kills him immediately, and then sniffs the gun smoke because he's insane. He holds the gun to his nose and smells it because he thinks he's crazy. Bond does not drink enough in this movie. In the book, Bond is drinking constantly. It's hilarious. Like, even before important missions and stuff, he literally has a double bourbon before he takes a nap before his big night dive. Like, he's drinking constantly in the book. It's very funny. A little detail that I thought was interesting is that when they're prepping for the big final fight scene, we get to see both the perspective from Spectre and the perspective of Bond and his people, and they kind of like get ready the same way. Like, they both take, like, Spectre, they take like amphetamine or whatever to like, because they have to like swim a long way or whatever. And in Bond, when they're doing it, they like take these battle pills, they're called, which is it's essentially the same thing from my understanding. And they like number off the same so that they all have numbers and everything. It's all very similar. I think they were kind of doing the idea that, like, you know, 2 sides of the same coin here. The movie is just not at all concerned with explaining why they have to fight underwater. Yeah. In the book, they actually have to fight underwater because they need to wait for Largo to get the bomb off the ship to even confirm that the bomb's on the ship, because they don't know for sure. If they were to just try to like arrest them or whatever, the bombs might not be on the ship. Yeah. And so it might just blow everything. They might blow their cover and immediately like they would like arrest Largo with nothing to show for it, basically. So they need to wait for him to take the bomb off the ship, but then they have to stop him before he gets the bomb to where it needs to go. So they literally have to attack him underwater. Like, they have no other choice, essentially. And the movie kind of just doesn't, kind of hand waves that away, I feel like. But in the final fight scene, Largo attacks James Bond with an octopus underwater. They're like facing off in a trench under the ocean, and Largo reaches his hand into a rock and pulls out an octopus and then punches James Bond with it and wraps it around his face. Oh my God. It's incredible. I say punches him with it. He throws it at him. I don't know. He wraps around Bond's face and starts like pulling his mask off and stuff. It's incredible. And that's right before Domino kills him. In the movie, having the boat separate and then it becomes super fast is kind of fun. Like, that's like the big moment at the end where they separate.
Yeah, like it's a kind of a cool like set piece.
In the book, the boat is always just super fast and can do that hydrofoil thing where it like flies up on top of the water. That's just what the boat does, and it does it the whole time, and that's how they're able to like do their plot. Even is they're able to steal the bombs, because whatever. It's not a big deal, but it's whatever. I also thought it was very funny in the movie that apparently a bunch of the Spectre guys are just like stay behind on the boat shell thing, butt. And with like the entire U.S. Armada bearing down on them, and just like, I guess we'll just die. Whatever, fine. They really drew the short straw on that one. And then finally, in the final chapter, I actually like the final chapter in the book quite a bit because it's just in the hospital. Apart from the exposition, it's just in the hospital. Leiter's talking to Bond. He explains everything. And he says about Domino, that girl deserves all the medals. And I'll never call a girl frail again, at least not an Italian girl.
God.
which is very funny. And then Bond stumbles into Domino's hospital room and passes out next to her bed, and they fall asleep together, which is kind of sweet.
Cute.
All right. Time to find out what I thought was better in the movie.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
So I was immediately confused in the book by all the gambling lingo, and this is a recurring problem. You can tell Fleming knows his shit about these topics that he likes, and you just kind of have to go along for the ride and context clue things together if you're not a spy from the 40s who loves cars and obscure casino games. It's just, he talks about cars and casino stuff, and it's just all the stuff he uses lingos, and all the spy stuff is so much lingo, and it's just it's fine, it works, but it's just a little annoying. So the movie surprisingly tones down Bond's sexism quite a bit specifically because we're not in his head and we can't hear his thoughts. In the beginning of the book, Bond is bored with his desk work and he gets mad that his usual receptionist was replaced with, quote, a silly and worse ugly bitch. She's silly, and worse than that, she's ugly. So
Charming.
That's, yeah. At one point, when he first meets Domino, he picks her up Patricia. He picks Patricia up to keep her from getting hit by a car. And as he sets her down, he says his right hand held the memory. He doesn't say this. He thinks this. His right hand held the memory of one beautiful breast, which is just weird and gross. There's a moment between him and Patricia where he's naked and she's giving him a massage or whatever. And the thought he has is that he resents the neutrality in the relationship between an attractive woman and a half-naked man. It's offensive to him that a man and a woman have such a neutral relationship. That's problematic to James Bond. He muses on great man theory, basically kind of positing that some men just exude power and magnetism and that these men run the world, essentially. Which, I mean, obviously there's some truth to that in a horrible way, but whatever, it's still gross. He says this is a good thing. There's a fantastic diversion that is not in the movie about how some women are terrible drivers, and the reason they're terrible drivers is because when they're mainly terrible drivers. It gets worse and worse and worse. I'm just gonna read it real quick because it's so fucking funny and how just obnoxiously sexist it is. Women are often meticulous and safe drivers, but they are very seldom first class. In general, Bond regarded them as a mild hazard, and he always gave them plenty of road and was ready for the unpredictable. 4 women in a car he regarded as the highest potential danger, and 2 women nearly as lethal. Women together cannot keep silent in a car, and when women talk, they have to look into each other's faces. An exchange of words is not enough. They have to see the other person's expression, perhaps in order to read behind the other's words or to analyze the reaction to their own. So 2 women in the front seat of a car constantly distract each other's attention from the road ahead, and 4 women are more than doubly dangerous, for the driver not only has to hear and see what her companion is saying, but also, for women are like that the 2 behind are what the 2 behind are talking about. Yep. Yep. There's a moment later where when he's thinking about Domino and what kind of woman she is, thinks to himself, Bond reserved the terms whore and tart for streetwalkers and brothel workers, which I thought was very forward thinking of him.
Very progressive.
Yeah. When Domino leaves after their first meeting for literally no reason at all, Bond calls her a bitch.
In his head or?
No, out loud.
Oh.
Perhaps she put the car pointedly into gear. She took another look at him. She decided that she did want to see him again. She said, "But for God's sake, don't call me Dominetta. I've never called that. People call me Domino." She gave him a brief smile, but it was a smile into the eyes. She raised a hand, the rear wheel spat sand and gravel, and the little blue car whirled out along the driveway to the main road. It paused at the intersection, then, as Bond watched, turned right-handed towards Nassau. Bond smiled. He said, "Bitch," and then walked back into the restaurant to pay his bill and have a taxi called. End of chapter. What? What? I don't know. I do not know. At one point, he notices that Domino has a slight limp, and he finds this endearing, thinking, quote, It gives her a touch of childish sweetness.
What?
End quote.
A
Fucking
limp?
gross. Yep.
What? Make that make sense.
I don't fucking know. And then at one point later, when they're on the beach and she's naked, he describes her breasts as eyes looking up at him, which is not weird at all.
Oh, that's some men writing women shit.
Yep. It's not weird at all. At one point, James Bond goes on an immediate boomer monologue about how this is the very beginning, he's getting driven somewhere by a guy like in a car, and he goes on this boomer monologue about how the current generation is so lost and blah, 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 something, who cares? Also, the driver starts complaining about how old rich guys from Shrublands, which is where he's taking Bond, started patronizing his favorite local prostitute. And that priced her, because it's all like rich guys at Shrublands, and that them going to this prostitute priced her out of his price range. And now he's mad because she made enough money that she bought a car and just like took off. I thought that was kind of funny, but it's just a weird like side thing of just like this guy's like mad at a woman succeeding. I don't know. The movie also drops a lot of the more racially charged stuff throughout the book, which there's not a ton of it in this one, but there's a little bit. At one point, he describes, I believe it's Lipa, as an Oriental of Portuguese extraction, a Chinaman. And then I don't know if this is anti-Semitism, and it also may be tongue-in-cheek. I'm not sure. I did some looking, and it sounds like the consensus is that Fleming was probably anti-Semitic. But we're just
color me shocked.
Yes, he's describing the Boulevard Haussmann stretches from the Rue de Faubourg and Saint Honore to the Opera. This is in Paris. It is very long and very dull, but it is perhaps the solidest street in the whole of Paris. Not the richest. The Avenue de l'Aina has that distinction, but rich people are not necessarily solid people, and too many of the landlords and tenants in the Avenue de l'Aina have names ending in Escu, Ovich, Ski, and Stein, and these are sometimes not the endings of respectable names. Which... yeah. I'm not sure. That being said, there's some, and I don't have all the details, there's some added layers later in that chapter that make me think that maybe that's being a little tongue-in-cheek. It's hard to explain. I don't know. I'm not sure what to make of it. It felt a little maybe anti-Semitic or problematic. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And there's a line later where one of the bartenders at one of the places in Nassau is a black guy, and he's described as the barman moved away with Negro dignity. And I'm not sure what that means, and I'm not sure I want to. So I don't know what that means. I like that the movie changes Lippe trying to assassinate Bond to being right when he leaves the health clinic. In the movie, it's he leaves the health clinic, he goes back to MI6, he gets the mission to go to Nassau, he leaves MI6 to go to Nassau, and when he's leaving then, that's when Lippe attacks him, and that whole scene plays out very similarly, but then Bond just has to stop, go back to MI6, deal with the whole fallout of the assassination attempt, and then leave again to go. It's just a little clunky, and I thought the movie streamlined that in a way that made sense. I like the visual of having all the double O's in a big room together when he walks in and there's like 10 chairs and he goes and sits in the 7th one and M's like, you're late. I thought that was a fun visual, and I like seeing the other double O's.
That was, I guess I had never really given much thought to why James Bond was called 007, because I didn't realize that he was like the 7th spy in this organization. And I was wondering how many 00 agents there are, and if there are any stories about 1 through 6 or 8 and up, or just 007.
So they are mentioned in other stories. Famously, I believe it's 006 is like in GoldenEye. He's like a main character in GoldenEye, played by Sean Bean. But we see 9 or 10 of them in this movie. I can't remember how many chairs are there. It might even be 8. Is between 8 and 10 chairs. Apparently, I did some research, and in the books, Fleming only mentions by name like 4 to 5 other 00s. But it's like a whole section of MI6. There are the 00s. We assume there's at least probably 8, 9, 10 of them. We don't know how many there are for sure. But yeah, it's like a group of special agents, basically. Q, I love Q. Q's a ton of fun in all the movies. I was sad to see that he wasn't from the books, or at least he's not from this book, which was very surprising to me. He does not make an appearance in this book at all, and I don't know if he does in any other books. He might just be a movie invention. Bond's red wetsuit and white booty shorts.
Love
what
that.
a look.
Love
You
that.
made a social post about that. Looks fantastic. In the movie, Bond sneaks on to Largo's dive crew to kind of figure out what they're up to. And I thought that was kind of a fine way to condense everything that's happening. I don't think it's necessarily better than what happens in the book, but for the cuts that the movie's making, I think it works okay. The big underwater battle at the end of the movie is a lot of fun with them all launching spears at each other. There's all these fun gags. There's a pretty good moving side shot where we get all this fights happening. And there's a lot of fun choreography and stuff there.
Yeah, I thought the choreography for that scene was pretty impressive. They're not doing anything super wild.
But it's all underwater.
It's all underwater, and it's a bunch of people. Like, it's a ton of moving parts.
Yeah, and I actually didn't find it nearly as confusing as that reviewer had said. I thought I was able to follow pretty well, mostly what was happening. Obviously, you get some standalone shots that's a little bit just chaotic, and you're not exactly sure. But for the most part, I was able to follow kind of what was happening. And then my last note is that I think Bond and Domino getting picked up by the plane with the Fulton thing, that's a real thing, by the way. It's called the Skyhook or whatever, the Fulton system. I thought that was fun, even if it's, I think, a bit rushed and clunky in the movie. It felt very much like they were like, let's get this fucking over with, let's wrap this up. The book's ending has its good moments that I mentioned earlier, but it's also really exposition heavy with the here's what happened wrap up kind of thing. And but the movie's ending lacks kind of the weight and gravitas of the book. The book ends on a very serious note that I thought was interesting. And it's kind of 6 1/2 dozen of the other. But I like the Fulton thing. As a kid, I thought that was super cool. All right, I got a few things to talk about that the movie nailed.
As I expected, practically perfect in every way.
The cover for Spectre in Paris, it's the FERCO organization. We see the plaque on the building in the movie. It's the Fraternité Internationale de la Résistance contre l'Oppression, or whatever. A small detail that is better in the book is that when he goes inside, it's staffed entirely by 30 to 40-year-old dudes because it's all the Spectre agents. In the movie, it seems like a normal office, which is a better cover. But I like the idea in the movie, or in the book, they walk in and it's a row of 20 desks in a grid, and it's all identical looking 30-year-old white guys. Would have been a cool visual to me, but But it is the same organization that is a cover for Spectre in Paris. Bond does threaten to spank Moneypenny upon his return from Shrublands, and she says that he won't be able to because he's going to be living on lemon juice and yogurt for 2 weeks or whatever. That comes right out of the book. This is the fun sexual harassment of the Bond films. As you mentioned earlier, Lippe at the health clinic with the tattoo. Bond spots the tattoo and realizes something's going on with that guy. Bond does sexually assault Patricia identically in the book, where she has his hands over his head, and then he just grabs her and kisses her against her will. That plays out identically to how it does in the book. There's a fun little weird inverted reference in the movie where there's a scene where after they have Patricia and him have sex, Bond is rubbing her back with mink fur gloves. Yeah. That is in the book, but it's reversed. It's after Bond gets fucked up by the machine. Patricia is giving him physical therapy, and part of it is her rubbing his back with those mink fur gloves. So I thought that was a fun book reference, kind of inverting it. The mechanics of hijacking the plane and then killing the crew with the cyanide and everything while the guy doing it is wearing the oxygen mask is all pretty similar. It's a bit cleaner in the movie, in the movie. I liked in the book that he just opens the gas canister in the plane, and then he has to wait for a while for the cyanide to dissipate. Yeah. And he's super paranoid about it, and he literally waits an extra 30 minutes. Because he's worried the cyanide is not going to have dissipated enough and he's going to die. And then even still, he doesn't take his gas mask off in the book. And that was also why he's in the book. They mentioned he's 30 minutes late. And the reason he's 30 minutes late is because he was waiting an extra 30 minutes for the cyanide because he was super paranoid about it.
That was in the movie, some fast working gas.
It doesn't work quite that fast in the book, but it's pretty close. It's cyanide.
He opens it up and then everybody just immediately dies.
Yeah, it's pretty similar in the book. And it's even more heartbreaking in the book. And again, maybe this is part of it, is that in the book it's mentioned that he's like friends with some of these guys because they're like, I say friends. He says he likes some of them. I don't know if they're like his friends necessarily. But he likes some of them and he's like not thrilled about having to kill them for this mission, but he wants the money. So the bomb stealing and the camouflage of the tarp over the plane, the way they pull the bombs out underwater and put them on the sled and drive them away is all like identical to the book. The scene where Bond does a night dive to Reki the Disco is pretty spot on. Reki the Disco is great. That's a band name. That's a term that the movie or the book uses all the time. I assume it just stands for reconnaissance. It's like a short. So, yeah, but they use Reki all the time. It's very much a British word that I've heard used and stuff.
It feels very mid-century too.
Yeah. Have a little Reki. But anyways, but that whole scene where he gets attacked by the spear guy while he's like taking pictures of the hatch on the bottom of the boat. Again, only better in the book because Bond stabs that guy with a knife and then that guy gets eaten by a barracuda. This is what I was talking about earlier. Barracuda shows up and just kills that guy. But then they do throw hand grenades at him, which is exactly the same as in the book. And then finally, and again, there's a lot of stuff. This book is very similar to the movie overall, or the movie is very similar to the book. But my last note here is that when they go to do the reconnaissance on the underwater ship, Bond kills one of the sharks to distract the other sharks so that he can dive down and Reki the plane crash without getting eaten by sharks. All right, time for a few odds and ends before we get to the final verdict. So I noticed on Amazon when we rented this that the opening, at the beginning, it said like nudity, blah, blah, blah. Like it was going through like the things in the movie. And it said nudity. And I was like, there's like no nudity in Bond films. There's implied nudity, there's cleavage, but there's not nudity because they're like PG movies. But in the opening credits, you can see some nipples in some of the swimming women that are under at some point. I think that's where the
outline
is.
Of nipples.
And I think maybe in an old school projector theater and like the way movies used to be shown, that would not be noticeable. But in modern, maybe digitized and stuff, it is. I don't know. But yeah, I think that was the nudity. Also, the audio mix on the Amazon version we watched is absolutely atrocious.
Oh my God, it was so bad.
The dialogue was so far off, and we have that problem a lot, and everybody does with like the mix for home audio versus theater, blah, blah, blah. This was some of the worst I've ever had, where it literally had to like mute the audio when like music and loud things were happening and then crank it all the way up when dialogue was happening. And also our subtitles literally just didn't work.
Yeah.
Tried to turn them on like 4 times to try to,
they just wouldn't turn on.
Would not turn on. I loved the little miniature plane crashing when he lands the plane in the Bahamas. It's very clearly a miniature. I thought that was fantastic.
I love when I can tell things are miniatures in movies.
It's adorable.
Who eats corn chowder poolside?
So I don't think it makes it a ton better, but it is conch chowder is what they're saying. Or conch chowder.
Sounded like he said corn to me.
Yes,
but
they are specifically saying conch chowder because they're talking about how it's an aphrodisiac, because conch is an aphrodisiac, supposedly. And that is mentioned in the book. They're talking about eating conch or whatever. So yeah, that's a reference. It is, again, still questionable. I don't know if I want conch chowder
that's
in the middle of a hot
still
day.
A hot soup, right?
I would think.
Who doesn't love hot soup poolside?
Yeah.
So I'm obviously unfamiliar with James Bond movies all around. Does Q usually dislike Bond? Like, is that a recurring thing?
Yes, at least insofar as the Bond movies I've seen, yes. That is their dynamic, is that Q hates Bond's like cavalier attitude. And like he's very like flippant and like kind of like messes around with his gadgets and stuff, and Q's like, Bond, you child. Like that is their whole dynamic.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I was waiting the whole entire movie for James Bond to order a martini shaken, not stirred, and he never did, and I am very disappointed.
Yes. I don't. So he doesn't do that in every movie. I looked this up to see when this made its first appearance because I wasn't sure when. So it's mentioned in the book Diamonds Are Forever, which is 1956, and then like the second or third book or something like that. But it isn't said by Bond until Dr. No in 1958, and then it is said by Bond, or it is actually said by Dr. No in the first Bond film. And then it is not said by Bond himself until Goldfinger, which is the third film, the one right before this one.
Yeah.
However, in the first movie, or in the first book, Casino Royale, he does order a shaken martini, but he doesn't use that phrase. He orders the drink that will become synonymous with the shaken, not stirred.
Right.
It's called a Vesper, because it's named after the first Bond girl. And he orders it shaken. But he doesn't say shaken, not stirred, and it's not even a martini. It kind of is. It's got gin and vodka, but it's like a. Anyways, point being, it's not in this one. It does predate this movie and this book, but it just doesn't make an appearance in this one. So you'll have to wait for
disappointing.
Future one for that. In the book, Bond has to explain underwater hand signals to the Navy dive team that he has, which seemed really weird to me because they're like, the book specifically says, now they're not like there to be divers, but they specifically mention in the book that they are the 10 best swimmers in the like Navy or something like that he recruits.
Yeah.
And it just seems wild. And then he explains, like, okay, if I do this, this means stop. And I'm like, they would know that. They would absolutely know that. That's super weird.
Underwater military? Yeah.
Yeah. Super weird.
The moment in the movie that made us both chuckle a little bit, after Paula dies, Bond says to Leiter or somebody.
I think it's Leiter.
Leiter. Yeah. Tell him Paula's dead, and he just goes, okay.
And then it just cuts and we move on.
I was like, poor Paula.
I know, right?
Paula deserved better.
I agree. I like Paula. I was very disappointed by that.
Another thing that I hated about this movie was how absolutely positive I am that they just killed multiple sharks while making this movie.
I also think that's probably the case. Movies back then just did not give a shit about animals, generally speaking, and especially animals like that, like fish or whatever. They were particularly didn't care. But yeah, no, I also got that vibe.
My last note here, I genuinely had no idea that the Incredibles theme song is basically just the James Bond theme song.
Yes.
Or the bombastic one that plays at the end, not like the opening credits one.
Yeah. So I looked this up, and supposedly Brad Bird tried to get the Bond composer originally, and then it fell through for whatever reason, and then he just had Michael Giacchino do his best Bond impersonation. And I'd never really thought about this before, but The Incredibles really is like, what if a superhero team got dropped into a Bond film?
Yeah, kind of.
Like we get like the island with the secret lair and like Edna Mode feels kind of like a Bond character. Like just a lot of it is kind of like a Bond thing, and so it makes a lot of sense, but I never really thought about that before. It was interesting. But yeah, no, absolutely, that is an intentional reference by The Incredibles from what I was able to find. They basically, Brad Bird just wanted like the Bond theme essentially. All right, before we get to my final verdict, we want to remind you can do us a giant favor by heading over to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads. Let us know what you thought about Thunderball. God knows I had a lot of thoughts. We would like to hear what you had to think. We'll talk about those on the next prequel episode. If you want to do us a favor, head over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or anywhere you listen to the show. Drop us a 5-star rating. Write us a little review. We would appreciate that. And if you want to really support us even more than that, head over to patreon.com/thisfilmislit. You give us $2 a month. You get access to bonus content, or not bonus content. You get access to early access and ad-free episodes. $5 a month, you get access to bonus content. We just did an episode on Anastasia. If you want to hear our thoughts on Anastasia, it was Katie's birthday pick. You can hear that, and we'll be doing another episode here very shortly. And at the $15 and up level, you get access to priority recommendations, where if you have something that you would really like for us to talk about, you can recommend it, and we will add it to our list as soon as we possibly can, which is that exactly what this was from one of our patrons. Katie, who was it?
This was a request from Vic Vicious.
There you go. Vic Vicious, thank you for requesting Thunderball. It's time for my final verdict.
Now, are you ready for your sentence?
Sentence? But there must be a verdict first.
Sentence first. verdict afterward.
As I expected, Thunderball remains not my favorite Bond film, and I think arguably not even a top 10 Bond film. But it's also far from the worst the series has to offer. If you can look past the rampant sexism inherent to early Bond, Connery plays a captivating 007 with just the right balance of charm, humor, and gravitas, and the underwater set pieces are fun visual spectacles and impressive achievements in choreography and cinematography. There are also some fun additions like the femme fatale Fiona, Bond's CIA partner Paula, and the gadget master Q, and Claudine Auger has a great turn as Domino. But that's pretty much where my praise for this film ends. The book, on the other hand, while way more problematic, is leagues more interesting and layered. From watching the films as a child, I had only ever viewed Bond as the ultimate, quote-unquote, cool guy. A cool guy who was unfazed by anything and everything. In the films, regardless of the situation, he stays calm, cool, and collected. So it was fascinating to see a different side of Bond in this novel. He gets scared. He gets nervous. He doubts himself, and he gets queasy around particularly gruesome violence. It's something I just never expected, and I found it eminently fascinating. Fleming's writing style, when you can parse the lingo he's using, is thoroughly engaging, and even the stuff that is hard to understand makes the subject matter feel grounded in reality. Obviously, I don't understand classified, super top secret spy lingo, but I'm not supposed to. But you're allowed to piece things together through context, which can be fun in its own way, and it adds a sense of authority to the story. It makes you buy in and believe that this could be real. Despite the novel being deeply sexist at its core, Domino is a brilliantly written character who has more layers than you'd expect from, and pardon the term, a Bond girl. She's her own character with mountains of backstory and motivation that the movie just doesn't really care to show us. So while the book may be layered with a ton more misogyny, it somewhat balances that by giving us a multifaceted and complex female lead, which again, the movie is just not interested in doing. Finally, the plot in the book actually makes sense. Or at least it all added up to me, whereas the movie felt like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle with a third of the pieces missing. The connective tissue and the details in the story that makes us understand why characters are doing what they're doing and what people's goals are simply missing. That works okay for a movie that's only interested in being an action-adventure spectacle, but it doesn't make for the most satisfying narrative. So for all of those reasons, and some more that I'm sure I've forgotten, I'm giving this one to the book. Katie, what's next?
Up next, we are getting started on spooky season.
Let's go.
And we're going to cover something that I've been wanting to cover for a while. We will be talking about practical magic.
Absolutely. Very excited about this. A novel by Alice Hoffman and 1998 film. There you go. So yeah, we're getting ready for Halloween, talking about practical magic. In 2 weeks' time and in 1 week's time, we're previewing practical magic and seeing what all of you had to say about Thunderball. Until that time, guys, gals, non-binary pals, and everybody else,
keep reading books,
keep watching movies,
and keep being awesome.